Imagine a psychological paradox where the act of helping someone actually strengthens their fondness for you, rather than your liking being the motive for your aid. This intriguing phenomenon, known as the Benjamin Franklin effect, flies in the face of common sense, which suggests we lend help to those we already like. Instead, our minds tend to adjust our feelings toward others after we act, even when these actions contradict our previous opinions. This effect is named after Benjamin Franklin himself, who famously employed it in his political dealings. Facing an opponent who held him in low regard, Franklin chose not to flatter or charm him directly. Instead, he requested to borrow a rare book from the man's collection. Flattered or intrigued, the opponent granted the favor. When Franklin returned the book with gratitude, something unexpected happened. The man began to treat him with warmth and respect, as if a genuine bond had formed. This change results from cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort experienced when holding conflicting attitudes and behaviors. The helper's mind cannot reconcile lending help to someone they dislike, so it adjusts by convincing itself that the recipient must be likable to justify the action. I must like this person, otherwise why would I have done them a favor? Thought the opponent. This subtle mental shift illustrates the power of the Benjamin Franklin effect. The implications are profound. Asking for help, which pride might make us avoid, can actually endear others to us. This flips the usual narrative of influence. Instead of performing favors to gain affection, you prompt people to invest effort that binds them emotionally and motivates protective feelings toward you. Their success, approval, and well-being become partly linked to the actions they took on your behalf. With skillful application, the Benjamin Franklin effect can soften hostility, turning indifference into alliance. Manipulators, aware of this principle, deploy small requests, borrowing a pen, asking for advice, or seeking a minor favor, as invisible hooks. By the time the target realizes the manipulation, their emotional world is tangled in newfound loyalty. The danger is in the effect's invisibility. Those influenced feel honorable for helping, their egos bolstered by generosity and wisdom. Yet beneath the surface, their emotional narratives are rewritten without conscious consent. An adversary becomes a friend not due to changed values, but because of a borrowed book. The mind seeks the path of least resistance, not the objective truth. This psychological maze grows even more intricate in social dynamics, such as triangulation, a manipulative strategy where a third party is drawn into relationships to create tension, confusion, or rivalry. Triangulation relies on indirect communication, comparison, and gossip to destabilize bonds and assert dominance, often without direct confrontation. This method is a favorite tool of narcissists, toxic partners, and power-hungry leaders to keep others emotionally off balance and dependent. Imagine trusting someone, believing you share a private connection, only to discover they have shared parts of your conversations with others, twisting your words just enough to sow doubt, or casually praising another in your presence to make you feel insecure or excluded. This is triangulation. It often thrives not in loud disputes but in whispers, furtive looks, calculated silences, and subtle verbal jabs. The strength of triangulation lies in its emotional dissonance. Victims begin to question themselves. Why do I suddenly feel replaced? Why am I jealous? Why must I prove my worth? These self-doubts crumble self-esteem, leaving individuals more vulnerable and eager to reclaim their value in the eyes of the manipulator. These nagging questions chip away at your self-esteem, making you more pliable and desperate to regain your sense of worth in the eyes of the manipulator. The more confused and emotionally reactive you become, the tighter their grip on you grows. This insidious tactic frequently surfaces in romantic relationships, where one partner flirts with others or mentions them just enough to sow seeds of insecurity. It also appears in families, where a parent might pit siblings against each other to maintain control, or at workplaces where a manager praises one employee over another to foster covert competition. The outcome is fractured loyalty and shattered unity, leaving the manipulator untouchable, indispensable, and firmly in control. What makes triangulation so emotionally devastating is the illusion it creates. You believe the real problem is the third person, your rival or competitor, but the true weapon is the puppeteer behind the scenes. They elicit reactions and then retreat, feigning innocence. You're left paranoid, engulfed in a desperate need for approval, uncertain of what is real. The more you chase clarity, the deeper you fall into their web. That is the brilliance of triangulation. It directs your suspicion outward, away from yourself, until the only constant in the chaos is the very person who engineered it. Another powerful mechanism in manipulation is the negative reinforcement loop. This psychological trap forms and controls behavior not by offering rewards, but by strategically removing discomfort as a seemingly benevolent relief. Imagine being criticized, ignored, or made to feel unwelcome, anxious, or scared. And then, the moment you apologize, comply, or alter your behavior, the tension disappears. Warmth returns, smiles reappear, and conversations flow as if nothing happened. Your brain, desperate to avoid emotional punishment, clings to this pattern. Obey, and the pain stops. This cycle doesn't nurture genuine love. It conditions you like an animal avoiding shocks. Over time, avoidance becomes a prison. You tiptoe around moods, suppress your needs, your voice, even your identity, just to avoid triggering the punishment again. The rules shift constantly. You don't have to win. You only have to keep chasing that fleeting feeling of okay. In toxic relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional, this cycle becomes the foundation of control. The manipulator rarely needs to yell or threaten physically. All they must do is make you feel bad whenever you resist, and then make that bad feeling vanish once you submit. It's subtle, it's cyclical, and it erodes your independence gradually, often without your awareness of how deep the damage runs. The most insidious aspect of the negative reinforcement loop is how it rewires your emotional instincts. You start associating the world not with real love or connection, but with surrender, silence, and capitulation. You find yourself thanking the person who hurt you simply because they didn't hurt you today. And so the cycle continues, not because you want it, but because your nervous system cannot endure the pain of hearing no. Escape becomes entrapment. Intermittent reinforcement stands as one of the most psychologically addictive manipulation tactics ever identified. Unlike providing steady rewards, this method doles out positive responses unpredictably, creating an intense emotional dependency in the victim. This approach is much more than mere manipulation. It operates like an emotional gambling game. Imagine someone treating you with affection, acknowledgement, and warmth, only to suddenly withdraw, become cold, dismissive, or even cruel. You're left bewildered and anxious, desperately trying to pinpoint what went wrong. Just as you're about to give up or challenge the behavior, they shower you again with kindness. Smiles reappear, compliments flow, and they act as if nothing ever happened. This brief burst of pleasure becomes your hit, your dose, and so you stay, waiting and hoping, trapped in an ever-repeating cycle. The unpredictability hooks you. Unlike consistent reinforcement that builds trust, intermittent reinforcement breeds obsession. It mirrors the psychological mechanisms behind slot machines and gambling addiction. Rewards arrive at random intervals, so your brain remains constantly engaged, striving to earn the next one. Dopamine is released not merely upon receiving the reward, but during its anticipation. This anticipation becomes intoxicating, a drug in itself. Within relationships, this pattern elevates toxic partners to near godlike status. They exert control over when you feel loved and when you feel worthless. They don't need to physically trap you. You ensnare yourself, relentlessly chasing the version of yourself that once felt alive in their presence. Moments of joy become so vivid, they overshadow the abuse. You forgive harm because you crave the good. Intermittent reinforcement is particularly cruel because of its inherent unpredictability. The manipulator offers just enough positivity to keep hope alive, but never enough to provide lasting security. You're endlessly chasing an emotional jackpot that may never come again. Even when aware of the toxicity, your attachment feels unbreakable. You crave the very person who shatters you. This isn't love, it's programming. Closely tied to this is the concept of hidden contracts, unspoken, invisible agreements created by one party that they never vocalize to the other. These operate on the belief, if I do this for you, then you owe me something. Even when these expectations remain unexpressed, they form silent bargains based on manipulation, resentment, and repressed needs cloaked in kindness. The person employing such a contract might go out of their way to assist you, listen to your troubles, or care for you profoundly. On the surface, this appears generous, love in disguise. Beneath it lies an invisible debt. They believe you owe them your time, loyalty, affection, sex, or commitments, simply because you behaved well or were a good person. The hidden contract is an emotional trap of blackmail disguised as courtesy. You are set up to disappoint without knowing it. When you fail to meet their secret expectations, they don't say, "I expected this." Instead, they respond with coldness, withdrawal, or guilt-tripping, leaving you perplexed and questioning, "What did I do wrong?" The real issue is that you have violated a contract you never formally agreed to. This tactic thrives especially in relationships where one partner fears rejection or direct confrontation. Instead of clearly expressing their desires, they cloak them in acts of service and care. The hope is that by demonstrating their value, you will naturally provide what they want. But when this doesn't happen, resentment festers like poison. Suddenly their kindness feels conditional. Their generosity sharpens. Smiles fade, and you're left feeling like the villain for not reading their unspoken thoughts. What makes hidden contracts emotionally explosive is the double betrayal. The manipulator feels betrayed because you broke the deal. You feel betrayed because the love or care you received was a lure, a trap. It is a quiet form of control that punishes the breach of an unsanctioned agreement. Worst of all, if you confront them, they will deny everything. "I never said I expected anything," they claim, casting themselves as the martyr and you as the ungrateful one. This is how hidden contracts turn care into a weapon and silence into a snare. Next comes the foot-in-the-door technique, a disturbingly subtle form of manipulation that disarms people by first appealing to their sympathy before making a request. It works by creating a moment of psychological vulnerability, a small crack in someone's emotional armor, through a simple, seemingly benign question like, "How are you feeling today?" This question seems innocent, harmless, even kind. But beneath it lies a calculated move to gain compliance. It may be casually phrased, "Hope you're having a good day," or more direct, "How are you holding up?" Either way, it loosens your defenses. Most people instinctively respond politely, often saying they're fine regardless of their true feelings. This brief exchange creates a mental contradiction. If I'm okay, then I should be helpful. I shouldn't say no. That is the trap. Immediately following this vulnerable moment, the manipulator puts forth their request. Maybe a small favor, a concession, or a bit of your time. Because you've just affirmed that you're doing well, and because they took a moment to show care, saying no feels emotionally wrong. You don't want to seem cold, difficult, or ungrateful. So you agree, unaware that social norms have cornered you. What makes this tactic so dangerous is how it exploits politeness and guilt. It turns your empathy into a weapon against you, and you don't even realize it. You think you're being kind, reasonable, and willing to help, but in reality, you're being manipulated by someone who knows exactly how to bypass your defenses. Retailers, bosses, even friends and family often use this method, sometimes unknowingly, especially when you're distracted or emotionally off balance. The question appears personal, even caring, and that is what gives it power. It isn't aggressive or demanding. It's gentle pressure wrapped in false warmth. You feel like you have a choice, but everything about the situation suggests that refusal would break an unspoken social rule. By the time you realize what just happened, you've already said yes, smiled, agreed, and made yourself available. The request you might have refused under other circumstances now becomes your responsibility. All this happened simply because someone asked, "How are you?" Reverse psychology, also known as inversion, is a subtle yet deeply manipulative tactic, rooted in leveraging human resistance. It works by suggesting the opposite of what you truly want someone to do, relying on their instinct to rebel, assert independence, or take control, thereby prompting them to do exactly what you initially intended. This mental game thrives on suggestion and defiance, where the real power lies in feigned refusal. Essentially, reverse psychology triggers one of our most fundamental psychological needs, the need for freedom. When people sense their choices are becoming limited, their natural response is to resist. This emotional reaction is called reactance, a drive to reclaim independence whenever it feels threatened. The brilliance of reverse psychology is in wielding this instinct as a weapon. Suppose you encounter a stubborn or rebellious individual. Telling them, "You really should apply for this job," might provoke resistance out of pride or fear. But saying, "You probably won't want to apply, it's not for you," sparks their ego. Suddenly, they're motivated to prove you wrong. The idea becomes theirs. They feel in control, though they're following the path you laid out. This approach frequently applies not just to children or defiant personalities, but equally in adult relationships, negotiations, and sales. A manipulator might say, "You probably wouldn't want to be with someone like me, considering the other person must protect their interests." Once you label something as forbidden or undesirable, it gains allure. This isn't logic. It's emotional rebellion. The dark power of inversion lies in its denial. Should the target confront the manipulator, they may respond, "I never told you to do that." Herein lies the cruelty, allowing the manipulator to lead people as if they're not really leading at all. It creates an illusion of independence while subtly directing choices with invisible strings. The victim never detects the manipulation. They believe it was their idea all along. They feel clever for defying you. Meanwhile, you smile knowingly, aware that you never wanted them to comply. You wanted them to resist. Resistance becomes the gateway. Resistance becomes the trap. Another cruel weapon is gaslighting by omission, a particularly insidious form of psychological manipulation in which the abuser doesn't lie explicitly, but deliberately omits key details that distort your reality. What breaks you isn't what they say, but what they leave unsaid. This tactic slowly erodes your memory, instincts, and ultimately, your sanity. Not through confrontation, but through silence. It starts subtly. You notice gaps. Something doesn't add up, but there's no clear evidence of deceit. Your partner leaves out where they have been. A friend withholds important information. Your boss forgets to relay details that could influence your decisions. You begin sensing something is wrong, but when you ask, you receive calm dismissal. "I didn't think it was important." You must have misunderstood. Or worse, "I never said that." Since you weren't directly lied to, there's nothing concrete to prove. You start doubting your perceptions and emotional responses. You replay conversations repeatedly in your mind, searching for what you missed. But there was no truth to be found. It was concealed. Silence was the weapon. Gaslighting through omission thrives in emotionally charged relationships. The manipulator carefully curates the narrative, feeding you only fragments that keep you compliant, confused, and dependent. They omit the context that could empower you and hide the truth that might reveal their behavioral patterns. They erase timelines, skip over names, and leave out motives, all while maintaining a veneer of innocence. It might feel like you're losing your grip, but in reality, they are tightening theirs. This form of gaslighting is profoundly destructive, precisely because it leaves no fingerprints. You're left to explain what was never said. You feel paranoid, but can't pinpoint why. That confusion twists inward. You blame yourself. Anxiety heightens, vigilance intensifies, and you desperately seek clarity that never arrives. This desperation is under their control. Over time, you may stop asking questions. You may lose trust in your own intuition. You learn to live with half-truths and missing pieces, convincing yourself that if something were truly wrong, they would have told you. But they won't. Because the lie hides in the silence. And that silence slowly erodes your reality, one omission at a time. Next comes semantic infiltration. This deceptive psychological tactic manipulates perception by embedding emotionally charged or ideologically loaded language into everyday conversation until the words themselves start shaping your thoughts, beliefs, and behavior, often without your awareness. It's not about what is true, but what sounds true. The goal is to change how people think by altering the words they unconsciously accept. Propagandists, politicians, cult leaders, corporations, and manipulators exploit this understanding. Language doesn't just describe reality, it creates it. When you begin using their terms, you start viewing the world through their lens. You stop questioning the conversation's foundation and begin debating within the framework they established, which is exactly what they want. Imagine someone consistently labeling surveillance programs as security measures or calling military peacekeeping and emotional abuse tough love. You adopt these terms, and gradually your emotional reactions shift. Safety feels reassuring. Tough love sounds noble. This is semantic infiltration at work, a quiet, nearly invisible intrusion into your cognitive map. Manipulators use it to frame conversations before they begin. They don't dispute facts. They rename them. They label your hesitation as fear, your boundaries as selfishness, your anger as drama. And once you accept even one of these labels, the breakdown begins. You doubt yourself. You adapt. You stop resisting. Not because you've been convinced, but because the battlefield has shifted. That's why cults invent special terms for outsiders, why marketing targets consumer communities, and why abusers say things like, "I just have high standards," instead of, "I'm controlling." Once you accept their language, you are inside their world, oblivious to the manipulation because their words feel right. Semantic infiltration is frightening precisely because it's so subtle. No threats, no demands, just words. But those words build narratives, and those narratives shape choices. By the time you feel pressure, it's too late to notice that your belief shifted, not due to arguments, but through slow, quiet meaning seepage. Boundary erosion is a gradual, calculated psychological tactic designed to break down a person's limits without their awareness, until their sense of self is undermined and their defenses vanish. It's not a sudden explosion, but a steady drip. One favor here, one joke there, and before you know it, you're hearing, "Why are you so difficult?" repeatedly. This is manipulation in its quietest, most corrosive form. At first, it seems harmless. Someone asks a small favor that makes you a little uncomfortable. You say yes to avoid confrontation. Later, their demands increase. Maybe their comments cross acceptable lines, sexually, emotionally, or socially. You hesitate, unsure how to respond. They shrug it off or say, "You're too sensitive." And so your boundary shifts. This is the poison of boundary destruction. Abusers never strike directly. They chip away methodically, always framing their intrusions as normal, justified, or even loving. "I check your messages only because I care." You don't need privacy if you have nothing to hide. You're overreacting. It was just a joke. Every crossed line weakens your confidence. The inner voice that once said, "This is wrong," grows quieter each time you silence it to keep the peace. This tactic is cunning in how it alters your reality, causing emotional fatigue. Over time, you question your right to have boundaries at all. You may start apologizing for feeling discomfort. You tell yourself you're dramatic, selfish, ungrateful. Meanwhile, the manipulator grows bolder, more intrusive, and increasingly in control. This isn't about compromise, it's about conquest. Gradually, you become someone who tolerates things you once would have fled. Your body tightens when they enter the room. Thoughts scramble before you speak, and you still wonder, maybe it's just me. This is the last blow. When boundary erosion works, you stop defending yourself. Not because you can't, but because you no longer believe you are allowed. You've been taught to betray your own boundaries with a smile to keep the peace. Love bombing is a psychological manipulation technique that hides its claws in attachment, intensity, and overwhelming attention. At first, it seems like a dream, as if you finally found someone who sees you, cherishes you, chooses you without hesitation. They shower you with compliments, constant messages, long declarations of love, and grand gestures. You feel special, chosen, safe. But beneath the adoration lies a calculated trap. This isn't love. It's control disguised as passion. The goal of love bombing isn't to give, it's to hook. It overwhelms your emotional defenses, floods your nervous system with dopamine, and pulls you into a fast addiction before you can think. Healthy relationships build trust gradually. Love bombing dangerously accelerates intimacy, keeping you emotionally intoxicated enough that warning signs go unnoticed. The manipulator studies your needs, wounds, complexes, desires, and mirrors the exact version of a partner you've always dreamed of. They say things like, "I've never felt this way about anyone, we're soulmates," or "I can't live without you." It feels like destiny. But it's not about you. It's about what they gain when you're hooked, because the high always ends. After the love-bombing phase, attachment turns unstable. The manipulator distances themselves, criticizes, withholds attention, or makes you feel that you're losing the magic unless you start chasing it again, proving yourself, earning back what once came freely. Suddenly, you find yourself grasping for scraps of validation from the very person who once drowned you in affection. This marks the second phase of the trap: emotional conditioning. You remember how they made you feel at the start, and now you'll do anything to capture that sensation again. You blame yourself, you try harder, you forgive emotional blows, holding on to the hope that the person who made you feel alive will return. But that version never truly existed. It was bait. Love bombing is not attachment, it's warfare. Intensity is not genuine connection, it's manipulation through fantasy. Once trapped in this cycle, silence wounds more than lies ever could. Withholding information is a manipulative tactic based on deliberate silence. It's a conscious choice to keep someone in the dark, not by lying, but by refusing to share critical truths that would enable them to make informed decisions, protect themselves, or understand their situation. What makes this so cruel is that the victim often remains unaware until it's too late. This tactic is subtle, strategic, and highly effective. It's not what you hear that shapes your reality, but what you don't. Your partner knows things that could change your feelings toward them, but opts to spare your emotions. A boss hides news impacting your work, yet blames you for not knowing. A friend conveniently forgets to tell you what they tell everyone else. These gaps in truth aren't accidental, they're manufactured. The manipulator stays silent not because they forgot, but because knowledge is power, and keeping you uninformed renders you powerless. It traps you in uncertainty. You can't trust your judgment because essential details are missing. Your instincts whisper that something is wrong, but you lack proof. You doubt your intuition, memory, and self-worth. Withholding information emotionally devastates precisely because it undermines trust without confrontation. The manipulator appears innocent. They didn't lie or yell, they simply said nothing. When confronted, you meet confusion. "I didn't think it mattered." "You never asked." Or the classic, "I was protecting you." Suddenly you feel irrational, desperate to know the truth. In relationships, this tactic destroys intimacy under the pretense of preserving it. It creates emotional distance. You begin doubting what you know, and worse, what you deserve to know. The manipulator becomes the keeper of truth, and you grow dependent on their selective narratives to piece together your reality. It's the quietest form of control. Not loud, not violent, just the void where truth should be. And in that void grows fear, confusion, and doubt, until one day you realize you were never loved, supported, or respected. You were controlled, kept informed just enough to stay nearby, but never enough to feel free. All it takes is your conscience. This is the art of weaponizing your sense of morality, responsibility, or love against you, making you feel like the villain simply for having needs, boundaries, or independence. This tactic works by inducing guilt over things you should never feel guilty about, and then exploiting that emotion to control you. It begins with subtle remarks, slight digs, or emotional sabotage. You say no, and they reply, "Fine, I'll just do it myself." As always, you speak for yourself, and they respond, "After all I've done for you." There's no need for direct attacks, just seeds planted carefully. And those seeds grow into shame, self-doubt, and a painful urge to fix everything, even if you did nothing wrong. That's the trap. Guilt suppresses your empathy. The manipulator knows you care, so they use your compassion as a weapon. They cast themselves as the victim of your choices, no matter how justified or healthy. Suddenly saying, "I need space," makes you selfish. Prioritizing your mental health means abandoning them. They twist the story so that you end up apologizing for merely trying to protect yourself. Worst of all, guilt often comes from those you love, parents, partners, friends, people who know exactly where your emotional pressure points lie. They don't ask outright. They hint. They don't argue. They withhold love. And when they see remorse in your eyes, a softer tone, weakened resolve, they know their tactic worked. You submit, not out of agreement, but out of guilt. By doing so, you reinforce the behavior that manipulates you. Every time you give in, you teach them that wounding your heart just a little is enough to get what they want. This is not emotional honesty. This is emotional blackmail. It's designed to make you betray yourself so they don't have to feel uncomfortable. And once you learn to carry another's guilt, it becomes a leash they pull whenever you try to leave. Disqualification. The push and pull. Disqualification, known widely as the push and pull tactic, is psychological manipulation intended to create intense emotional dependence by sending mixed signals. Closeness abruptly shifts to distance. Affection to coldness. Affirmation to rejection. This emotional whip is no accident. It's a deliberate strategy to keep you chasing approval you can never fully grasp. It starts with attraction. The manipulator floods you with attention, admiration, and charm. You feel special, chosen. You begin to believe you're safe with them and let your guard down. You invest yourself. Then, just as the connection begins to feel real, they push you away. They withdraw emotionally. They criticize, mock, go silent, or turn cold and distant, leaving you confused. What did I do wrong? What changed? Why are they lashing out at me? That confusion is the core of it. Your nervous system overloads. You try harder. You apologize even when you've done nothing wrong. You chase the initial high, the warmth, attention, connection, like an addict chasing the first dose. And every time you're ready to give up, they pull you back. A kind word, a caring gesture, a moment of softness. Your heart races. Maybe things are okay again, but they never last. Not for long. This back-and-forth dynamic becomes your new emotional reality. The push makes you feel uncertain, and the pull offers brief relief. Your brain associates comfort with the very person causing the pain. This is manipulation. They become simultaneously your wound and your balm. You don't see poison in them. You see salvation. You cling to them not because you feel good now, but because you once did and desperately want that feeling back. Disqualification turns your self-esteem into a yo-yo, soaring and crashing at their whim. They may tease you under the guise of flirtation, praise you only to sharply criticize, act possessive one day, and indifferent the next. Each push chips away at your confidence. Each pull gives just enough hope to keep you tethered. This calculated inconsistency becomes a weapon, forcing you to doubt yourself, your worth, and remain hooked to someone who constantly rewrites the rules to maintain control. Micro-invalidations are subtle, often indirect dismissals that erode your sense of reality, identity, or experience, one small wound at a time. They don't appear as overt cruelty, but as quiet, passive jabs, often masked as jokes, casual remarks, or advice. Their power lies in repetition. Each micro-invalidation chips away at your confidence, your voice, and your right to feel what you do. You say you're tired, and they reply, "You don't know what tired really is." You share excitement about a goal, and they shrug, "Don't hope too much." You express hurt, and they say, "That's life, we all go through it." When you speak your truth, they smile and say, "You're too sensitive." Each comment on its own may seem harmless or normal, but that's what makes them dangerous. They're not loud enough to spark confrontation, yet sharp enough to leave scars. When these come from those you trust, parents, partners, friends, mentors, the wounds cut deeper. You begin to wonder, am I overreacting? Was it really that serious? Are my feelings too intense? That's the trap. Micro-invalidations teach you to shrink, doubt your feelings before you even express them. They teach you your experiences don't matter unless approved by someone else. And eventually you absorb this message. You stop sharing. You suppress. You apologize for existing in your own story. Silence becomes both your shield and your prison. Manipulators wield this tactic with surgical precision. It lets them undermine your confidence without raising their voice. They appear reasonable, realistic, even well-meaning, but behind every subtle dismissal lies the same message. You're not as important as you think. What makes micro-invalidation so insidious is their gradual arrival. They come in moments, repeated, normalized, ignored, yet the damage accumulates like drops of poison in water. Ultimately, they quietly and permanently change how you see yourself, leaving no visible bruises, but deep scars within. Coercive team building is a covert psychological manipulation technique where the manipulator fabricates a false sense of partnership with you, using language and behavior that imply shared fate, common goals, or similar emotions, even when none exist. This illusion of unity is crafted solely to lower your defenses and hasten trust formation. Most dangerously, it often appears friendly and benign. The tactic begins with subtle phrasing. "We're in this together. Let's figure this out. Looks like we have a small problem, right?" The manipulator employs inclusive language, we, us, our, to create closeness and goodwill, even if they're a stranger or outsider. This simple language substitution triggers a deep psychological reflex. Humans are naturally tribal, wired to protect those in their group and bond over shared struggles. Manipulators exploit this instinct. Coercive team building often emerges during vulnerable moments. A stranger offers to help carry something, then says, "We make a good team." A colleague supports your idea, then adds, "We're in this fight together, right?" A toxic partner caught in a lie says, "We just need to fix this, you and me." Every time, your instincts push you to see them as allies, even when you sense otherwise. The menace of coercive team building lies in its seeming harmlessness. It simulates connection without creating it. You feel pressured to reciprocate, be polite, compliant, and cooperative. But behind this faux unity stands a manipulator with desires. Your trust, your acquiescence, your silence. This ploy is loved by con artists and scammers because it speeds emotional bonding. If they can make you see them as we, you'll invite them into your space, your mind, your decisions, and when things go wrong, they'll make you feel responsible, bound together. But the truth is, you were never on the same team. The connection was accidental, not built. Once you realize this, you see the we was never for you. It was a strategy to bypass your defenses without earning your trust. Minimization is another psychological manipulation technique that downplays the seriousness of your feelings, experiences, or pain to gain control, absolve responsibility, or avoid confrontation. It doesn't deny what happened but tells you it wasn't that bad. This erodes your trust in your own reality. You say something hurt you, and they say, "You're overreacting." You get angry, and they reply, "It was just a joke." You share something serious, and they sigh, "That's not what I meant. You're too sensitive." You cry, and they respond coldly. Minimization is dangerous because of its subtlety. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It gaslights without fully denying. It allows just enough truth to seem reasonable but strips it of meaning. It teaches you your pain is illegitimate until someone else validates it. Over time, you speak quieter. You soften your words, question your instincts, suppress emotions before they surface. Because you already know the script. Your pain will be met with dismissal. So silence feels safer than truth. Minimization is a favorite tool of abusers, narcissists, and toxic authority figures. Minimization is a manipulative strategy where someone downplays the gravity of their actions or offenses, deflecting attention from their misbehavior to your response. They might say, "I didn't hit you that hard, I was just anxious," or "I never betrayed you." By reframing the problem around how you reacted, they turn their guilt into your fault. This form of emotional manipulation not only causes inner turmoil, but also fosters isolation. Repeatedly hearing from someone you trust that your feelings are irrational erodes your confidence in your own perceptions. You find yourself apologizing for your tears, insisting everything is fine when it's not, and minimizing your pain just to cope. Yet the pain remains real, burning beneath the surface. It wasn't a joke. It was a real wound. Closely linked with minimization is the manipulative ploy of false promises about the future. This tactic involves making grand assurances about what the future holds to gain control, commitments, or emotional investment in the present, all while having no intention of fulfilling these pledges. It's hope weaponized. These visions of a better tomorrow dangle just far enough to keep you chasing them, even as real-time experiences contradict any progress. Often emerging during honeymoon phases in relationships, job offers, or sales pitches, you'll hear of amazing things just around the corner. "We'll live together. You're on track for a promotion. I'll give you everything you've ever wanted someday." These vivid dreams are painted with such clarity you can almost feel them. Emotionally, you anchor yourself to this future that is yet to come, and tragically, likely never will. This trap exploits basic human psychology, our innate yearning for hope, purpose, and belief. Manipulators understand this deeply. They don't need to reveal their true selves now because they've sold you on a future version of themselves, the one who will change, commit, and be ready. So you stay, you wait, you invest, suppressing your own needs for a maybe. That future continually recedes. There's always a reason why now isn't the right time. Something to fix or understand first. And whenever you almost speak your truth, they discard the next dream. We're almost there. I'm working on it. You just have to be patient. These promises become emotional currency, sufficient to buy your silence, loyalty, and time. Over time, the widening gulf between their words and deeds becomes a chasm. Still, you cling to the hope they gave you, because giving up means admitting you were deceived, that your love, effort, and faith were used as leverage, that you fell for someone who never truly existed. You stay not for who they are, but for the fantasy of who they said they would be, not because they appeared, but because they promised. Silence. Silence is among the cruelest psychological manipulations, as it punishes not with presence but with absence, depriving someone of communication, attachment, and recognition. At first glance, it may seem like needing space, but in truth, it's about control. It's not quiet, it's calculated. Silence speaks volumes. You are invisible. You don't deserve my words. You aren't important enough for my acknowledgement. And that absence wounds deeper than any shout. Silent treatment is a form of psychological manipulation designed to destabilize and control by withholding communication, affection, and recognition. It leaves you trapped in uncertainty, questioning yourself constantly. You replay every interaction in your mind, obsessing over what you did wrong, desperate to fix what's never clearly explained. This is the power of silent treatment. It compels you to beg for resolution, even from the one hurting you. Often it follows conflicts. Instead of addressing issues, they completely shut down. No eye contact, no messages, no emotional connection. You reach out, they ignore you. You apologize, they remain cold. The longer this stretches, the more it erodes your emotional stability. Your self-worth starts to hinge on breaking the silence. You doubt your reality, convincing yourself the problem is you because the punishment feels so harsh. But silence isn't a solution. It's a dominance assertion. It's emotional starvation. Manipulators know humans are wired for connection. Our brains interpret social rejection as physical pain. They exploit this vulnerability, making you suffer in silence, knowing the longer it goes on, the more compliant you'll be when it ends. And when it does end, when they finally speak again, it feels like relief, like rescue. You're so grateful the torment is over that you don't question the method. You absorb the unspoken lesson. Talk less, ask less, challenge less. Just avoid isolation again. Silent treatment trains you, not with violence but with emptiness. Not loud anger, but absence timed to break you gradually. Moral licensing is another cruel psychological trap, where a past good deed grants someone supposed permission to act poorly. Manipulators wield previous acts of kindness or morality as shields to justify or excuse destructive behavior. You see what I did for you? How can you blame me now? This is emotional bait and substitution. A partner who once showed great love and sacrifice now uses those memories as armor. When they lie, you forgive, because they once protected you. When they ignore your needs, you hesitate to complain because they're not a bad person. They've done so much for you. But here lies the trap. Your mind starts comparing past to present instead of seeing what's happening now. Moral licensing creates emotional confusion. You feel guilty for your pain and doubtful for noticing manipulation. You downplay your feelings because their past kindness overshadows your current hurt. Manipulators rely on this hesitation. After all, I've been there for you. You seriously doubt me now? One mistake and suddenly I'm the villain. They shirk responsibility and exploit your loyalty. In public or professional settings, this tactic grows even more insidious. Leaders or authority figures cite their fair reputation or altruism to conceal exploitation or abuse. I support everyone. You know that. I've always been ethical. Meanwhile, their actions speak differently, expecting you to overlook their misconduct. Minimization is a manipulative tactic where the abuser downplays the seriousness of their harmful behavior, shifting the spotlight from their actions to your reaction. They might say, "I didn't hit you that badly, I was just stressed," or "I never cheated on you." By doing this, they invert the narrative, making you feel at fault for responding to their wrongdoing. This technique doesn't simply cause emotional confusion, it breeds emotional isolation. When someone you trust repeatedly dismisses your feelings as invalid or exaggerated, you gradually begin to doubt your own reality. You apologize for shedding tears and report that everything is fine, even when it's far from that. To survive, you start minimizing your pain. Yet deep down, the wound burns because the pain was genuine, and it was never just a joke. Closely tied to minimization is the manipulative strategy of fabricating a hopeful future, a tool designed to gain control and emotional investment in the present without any real intention of fulfilling those promises. It is hope weaponized against you. This imagined future dangles just far enough away for you to keep pursuing it, even as the present stubbornly remains unchanged. Often emerging in honeymoon phases, job offers, or sales pitches, you hear grand declarations, "We'll live together soon," "You're on the path for a big promotion," or "One day I'll give you everything you ever wanted." These promises are painted vividly, with such clarity that you can almost feel them. Emotionally, you become attached to a future that never materializes, and worse, likely never will. This exploitation of human psychology taps into our deep desire for hope, meaning, and purpose. Manipulators don't need to reveal their true selves in the now because they sell you on a future self, someone who will change, commit, be faithful. So, you wait, invest, and trim your own needs for a maybe. Yet, that future keeps retreating. There is always a reason why now isn't the right time. Always something to fix or understand. And each time you nearly voice your doubts, they pull away the fantasy again. "We're almost there. I'm working on it. You just have to be patient." These promises become emotional currency enough to purchase your silence, loyalty, and time. Over time, the growing chasm between promises and actions becomes undeniable. Still, you cling to hope because admitting otherwise means conceding you've been deceived, that your love, effort, and faith were used as leverage, that you fell for someone who never truly existed. You stay not for who they are, but for the fantasy of what they claim they will become. Not because of their presence now, but because of their promises. Silence, too, is a merciless manipulation. It punishes by absence, not presence, robbing you of communication, affection, and recognition. It fosters uncertainty, guilt, and despair in its target. At first glance, it might look like the need for space, but in reality, it's about control. Silence is not peace. It screams with meaning. You are invisible. You don't deserve my words. You're not important enough for acknowledgement, and that void cuts deeper than any angry outburst. Emotional flooding is a deliberate manipulation method designed to bombard your mind until your resolve crumbles. This is psychological warfare, masked as urgency. Often it strikes without warning. One moment everything feels calm, the next you're hit with an avalanche, a barrage of accusations, dramatic actions, or a deluge of expectations that you must meet immediately. You have no space to think, much less articulate a coherent response. Your nervous system switches into survival mode: fight, flight, or freeze. Most often you freeze, immobilized, and that paralysis is exactly what the manipulator intends. When overwhelmed, your ability to think critically shuts down. Your desire for peace overshadows your pursuit of truth. So you concede, apologize, agree to things you barely grasp. You comply solely to end the chaos. But the manipulator's chaos isn't random. They generate disorder to force submission. Their intensity isn't a loss of control, it embodies control. This flooding tactic is prevalent in abusive arguments, where manipulators shout and overwhelm so rapidly that you can't interject. It's also common in toxic workplaces, where unreasonable deadlines, endless meetings, and last-minute demands keep you so occupied that fairness slips your mind. Flooding appears in love bombing too, where torrents of praise, gifts, and emotional excess come so fast you confuse it with genuine connection instead of manipulation. It's all flooding. Over time, this causes conditioning. You begin avoiding confrontation altogether. Walking on eggshells, you strive to manage everything beforehand, hoping to avoid the next emotional trap. You stop voicing needs. You suppress them to prevent flooding. This silence turns into self-betrayal. All of this arises from a survival instinct cultivated by the manipulator. Flooding terrifies because it's invisible to outsiders. It may look like a heated conversation, a demanding boss, or a passionate partner, but to you it is emotional drowning. After each episode, you emerge more exhausted, more compliant, and increasingly unsure of your right to simply breathe. Bait and accusation is a psychological manipulation strategy that lures you into an emotional, defensive, or candid reaction only to twist your answer into proof that you're the problem. It's the emotional counterpart to a provocation trap, snapping shut the moment you speak. This goes beyond sparking conflict. It crafts a no-win situation, punishing you simply for responding. Often it starts small: passive-aggressive remarks, vague accusations, or provocative questions aimed at your vulnerabilities. Maybe they say, "Must be nice to be ignored," or "Some people just don't know how to show gratitude." You feel hurt, confused, pressured to defend yourself. That's the bait. When you bite, when you react, explain, express hurt, or stand up for your rights, they attack. "Oh, you're so sensitive. I was just trying to talk. See why I can't have a conversation with you?" Now you're no longer the victim, but the instigator of drama. This tactic's goal is to provoke emotional vulnerability and then weaponize it. It flips the narrative. Suddenly they're calm and rational, while you find yourself overwhelmed or defensive. Emotional flooding is a manipulative tactic intended to overwhelm your mental capacity until your willpower collapses. It functions as a form of emotional shock warfare disguised as an urgent crisis. Often flooding arises abruptly. A seemingly peaceful moment is shattered by a sudden barrage, a torrent of accusations, theatrical outbursts, or a cascade of demands that you must instantly fulfill. You have no time to process, much less respond clearly. Your nervous system shifts into survival mode: fight, flight, or freeze. Freezing is the common outcome, and that paralysis is exactly what the manipulator seeks. Under such duress, your critical thinking falters. Your need for calm outweighs your pursuit of truth. Consequently, you surrender. You apologize, consent, or comply with things you don't fully comprehend, simply to make the turmoil cease. But chaos isn't accidental in manipulation. It's deliberately crafted. The manipulator wields chaos to enforce obedience. Their intensity is not a loss of control. It is control itself. Flooding occurs in arguments where the abuser shouts or overwhelms you so loudly and quickly that no response is possible. This tactic is present in toxic work environments where unreasonable deadlines, never-ending meetings, and last-minute requests monopolize your attention, blurring notions of fairness. It also appears in love bombing, where an unrelenting flood of praise, gifts, and intensity is mistaken for genuine connection, but is, in fact, manipulation. It's all flooding. Over time, this strategy conditions you to avoid conflict altogether. You tread lightly, attempting to steer situations preemptively to avoid emotional traps. You cease voicing your needs, suppressing them as a defense against flooding-induced trauma. This silence amounts to a betrayal of self. Such responses emerge from survival instincts, shaped and exploited by the manipulator. What makes flooding terrifying is its invisibility. Outsiders may perceive it as passionate disagreement, stringent management, or a zealous partner. Yet for you, it feels like drowning in emotional chaos. Each episode leaves you more fatigued, more compliant, and increasingly uncertain about your basic right to exist freely. Bait and accuse is a psychological game wherein manipulators provoke you emotionally for a defensive, honest, or reactive reply, only to twist your response into evidence that you are the source of the problem. It's the emotional analog of a trapdoor triggered by your speech. Beyond sparking conflict, it engineers no-win scenarios that punish you for merely reacting. Often it starts with subtle digs, passive-aggressive comments, vague blame, or provocative questions targeted at your vulnerabilities. Perhaps they say, "It must be nice to be ignored," or "Some people just don't know how to show gratitude." You feel hurt, bewildered, pressured to defend yourself. There lies the bait. The moment you respond, trying to explain, getting upset, or standing up for yourself, they strike. "Oh, you're so sensitive. I was just trying to have a conversation. See why I don't want to talk to you?" You're no longer the victim. You're the source of drama. This tactic aims to make you emotionally vulnerable and then weaponize that vulnerability against you. The script flips. They slip into calm reason, while you spiral into hysteria or defense. Eroding your sense of self is one of the cruelest manipulative tactics. It's not just about causing pain, it's about erasure. This slow, deliberate assault chips away at who you are until you come to depend on the manipulator's approval, control, or validation to even recognize yourself. This is identity sabotage. At first, it's subtle. Small comments on your personality, habits, appearance, or aspirations. "You're so dramatic." "You always exaggerate." "You're not really a creative person." "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" These words don't seem insulting. They're couched as jokes, concerns, or feedback. But they're precise, surgical, and repeated enough times to stick. You start doubting yourself, retreating from things that once brought joy. You hesitate to speak, dress differently, or set goals. You silence parts of yourself not by choice, but because someone made you feel those parts are wrong. too much, insufficient, shameful, or flawed. This is the destruction of identity. When your sense of worth is dismantled piece by piece, your confidence doesn't just waver. It becomes reliant on the manipulator's judgment. You seek their permission to exist authentically. You question whether your feelings are justified. You obey their evaluation, even on issues you once knew for certain. And the more you comply, the smaller you become. What makes this tactic so insidious is its invisibility. It doesn't arrive as screaming or slammed doors. It creeps in as quiet corrections, constant truths, mirrors reflecting only your flaws. Whenever you attempt to reclaim yourself, they push back. You've changed. This isn't you. What happened to the person I loved? The irony is that they're the ones who changed you. They broke you, then blamed you for being incomplete. Over time, your identity becomes so entangled with their approval that being yourself feels like betrayal. That's when they win, not by controlling your actions, but by making you forget you ever had the right to choose who you are. You don't just lose confidence, you lose yourself. Playing the victim is another deeply manipulative psychological strategy, where someone feigns injury or hardship, not from real suffering, but as a ruse to evade responsibility, elicit sympathy, and seize control. This isn't vulnerability. It's weakness turned into a weapon. The tactic works because it taps into one of our strongest instincts, the drive to protect those who appear hurt. At first, it's almost undetectable. The manipulator appears wounded, misunderstood, or offended. They cry, sulk, or withdraw. They utter phrases like, "I guess I'm always the bad guy," or "I try so hard, but it's never enough." Their voice cracks, eyes well up, and behind the act lies a calculated goal. Flip the power dynamic to make you the one apologizing, comforting, and retreating, even when they cross the line. The brilliance of victim playing is in how it rewrites the narrative. Suddenly, their betrayal becomes your insensitivity. Their aggression masks deeper pain, recast as self-defense. The more sympathy you offer, the tighter the leash they hold. Your compassion becomes their chain. In relationships, this tactic makes you the villain for having boundaries. If you resist, they withdraw emotionally. If you ask for change, they accuse you of being demanding or cold. Gradually, you limit yourself just to avoid hurting them. You tiptoe around the truth, overcompensate, and apologize for pain you didn't cause. The most dangerous part? It works even when you know it's manipulation. Because guilt defies logic. Witnessing someone crumble before your eyes awakens a primal urge to fix, soothe, and make things right. Manipulators exploit this. They seek tears, not honesty. They rehearse pain instead of accepting blame. They don't need to be right. They only need to feel wronged. Pity disarms you, quiets anger, blocks responsibility, and binds you emotionally to the one who hurts you, and then cries when you try to leave. The false consensus trick. This subtle yet potent psychological ploy convinces you that everyone agrees with the manipulator. Everyone except you. Its purpose is isolation and pressure, cornering you into believing your thoughts, feelings, or boundaries aren't just wrong, but abnormal. And feeling outcast in the crowd triggers self-doubt. You question yourself, not the group. This trick doesn't rely on facts, only assumptions. Everyone thinks you're too sensitive. Most people would have ignored this by now. Honestly, you're the only one who cares. These phrases seed doubt in your mind. Hearing them from close ones, partners, parents, friends, cuts deepest. You don't just feel misunderstood, you feel unworthy. This false consensus taps into a core human fear: social rejection. Instinctually wired for belonging, when someone signals your opinion clashes with the majority's, you shrink. You hush yourself, doubt your instincts, and comply, not from conviction, but from fear of solitary error. Manipulators wield this tactic to shirk responsibility. If challenged, they avoid disputing truth. Instead, they wield public opinion as a weapon, even without proof. They conjure invisible armies of approval that pressure you to face everyone alone. They may reference imagined others, friends, exes, colleagues, allegedly sharing their view. But these people never appear. They never speak. They may not exist at all. The trick's potency lies in its subtle cruelty. It doesn't attack directly. It rigs your entire mental world against you. Once you believe your voice is the lone dissent, you silence it. It's not about changing your mind. It's about isolating your truth until it seems madness. Deliberate misinterpretation is a manipulative strategy where someone intentionally distorts your words, intentions, or actions into something completely different, typically negative, to gain control, disrupt the conversation, or shift blame onto you. This is psychological diversion disguised as misunderstanding. The more you try to clarify the situation, the deeper you fall into their trap. It often starts with a simple statement. You set boundaries. You express discomfort. You share what's troubling you, but instead of addressing what you said, the manipulator responds with a twisted version. You say, "It hurt me when you ignored me." They reply, "So now I'm a terrible person who can never do anything right." You say, "I need some time to think." They accuse you of abandoning them. They don't respond to you. They respond to the straw man they built, and then punish you for it. This tactic is especially effective because it forces you into a defensive position. You catch yourself explaining, rephrasing, apologizing for things you never meant. But each attempt at clarity feeds them more material to distort. They don't want to understand you. They want to control the narrative. By misrepresenting your words, they turn you into the aggressor and themselves into the victim. Deliberate misinterpretation often appears in emotionally abusive relationships, where communication becomes a battlefield. You begin to speak carefully, temper your words, fearing misinterpretation. You start absorbing their false readings, thinking, "Maybe I wasn't clear. Perhaps I sounded harsh. Maybe it's my fault." But this confusion isn't accidental. It's planned. The manipulator uses this tactic to shirk responsibility. If they can miscast your feelings as aggression, they don't have to face their behavior. If they can frame your vulnerability as manipulation, they avoid empathy. They transform language itself into a weapon, turning every word into a potential charge. Over time, you might stop speaking altogether. The emotional cost becomes too high. You silence yourself, not because you are wrong, but because being right is pointless when your words are constantly twisted into weapons. And that is precisely what they want from you. Silence, insecurity, and easy control. Anchoring negative emotions is a manipulative psychological technique that programs a person to associate specific people, places, phrases, or behaviors with emotional pain, so even neutral or harmless situations become threatening. It is classical conditioning in its most aggressive form. This tactic doesn't merely influence your choices, it rewires your emotional reflexes. Over time, you start reacting with anxiety, shame, or fear, not because of what's happening now, but because that's what you've been trained to feel. The manipulator creates emotional anchors by linking ordinary moments with pain. They might humiliate you right after you express happiness. They might provoke fights whenever you hang out with friends. They might turn cold each time you succeed. Eventually, your nervous system forms this association. Joy equals punishment. Success equals conflict. Speaking up equals silence. Unknowingly, you begin avoiding what once made you feel alive. That's how the anchoring effect works. Logic doesn't matter. Repetition is the linchpin of emotional anchoring. The more frequently a negative feeling pairs with a specific trigger, the stronger and deeper that anchor embeds itself within you. A simple phrase like "we need to talk" can cause your stomach to twist in anxiety. A certain tone of voice can make your palms sweat. Even a familiar room in your own home can start to feel threatening. Before long, the manipulator doesn't need to act consciously. Your body reacts automatically on autopilot to these emotional triggers. This tactic is especially insidious because it bypasses rational thought. You may tell yourself that you are safe, that there is no reason to feel guilty or afraid, yet your physical response betrays you. Your body still flinches. Nets of emotional associations already tightly woven. The more you react with fear, silence, or compliance, the more these emotional anchors sink, gradually stripping away your emotional freedom. The manipulator now holds the reins, controlling the situation without raising their voice, training you like a dog within invisible electric fences. You avoid behaviors not because you cannot execute them, but because you fear the consequences if you do. Your world becomes increasingly constrained as you begin doubting the places, people, and parts of yourself that used to bring joy. This is the true aim of anchoring negative emotions. Not just controlling your actions, but making you afraid to be yourself. Ingratiation is a manipulative psychological strategy cloaking domination in charm. It is a calculated combination of flattery, helpfulness, and apparent admiration designed to lower your defenses, win your trust, and make you feel valued, only to later exploit that connection to wield guilt or control over you. This is not kindness. It's a transaction, and you're the product. Manipulators don't start with demands or pressure. They start by making you feel special. They praise your intelligence, your work ethic, your strength. They offer unsolicited help. They notice the tiniest details about you that make you feel seen. This attention feels like validation, so you welcome it. You often let them in quickly without realizing how rapidly they have insinuated themselves because it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like you've finally been recognized. But beneath the surface, every gesture is strategic. Each compliment carries a purpose. Each favor plants a seed. You owe me. Manipulators invest, so they expect loyalty, influence, and access in return. They become indispensable so that when they ask for your time, silence, or compromise, you feel pressured to say yes. Refusing doesn't just feel awkward, but wrong, as if betraying them. Ingratiation thrives where people crave approval. In the workplace, social groups, or new romantic relationships, where status and recognition matter. Manipulators mimic your values, echo your language, pose as the perfect friend, teammate, or loving partner. But over time, charm wears thin. Compliments become conditional. Favors prompt guilt. Warmth turns icy when you resist. The danger of ingratiation is how pleasant it feels. Initially, it quenches a deep longing to be seen, heard, and accepted. You feel lucky to have such a person in your life. You won't spot the trap until you're caught, because the one who once praised your independence now calls you needy. The one who admired your strength now brands you cold. When you set boundaries, their praise clamps down like a leash. It wasn't love, it was pressure. It wasn't generosity, it was control. Emotional blackmail is a covert form of psychological manipulation that leverages fear, guilt, and a sense of obligation to compel compliance. Not through explicit threats, but through overwhelming emotional pressure so intense that resisting feels like betrayal. This is not about persuasion. It's about cornering you emotionally. A manipulator does not say, "Do this or else." Instead, they frame it as, "If you truly loved me, you would do this." Or, "After everything I've done for you, how could you refuse?" Saying no in such cases transcends setting boundaries. It feels like dismantling the entire relationship. Emotional blackmail is destructive because it weaponizes your own feelings against you. It turns your empathy, loyalty, and compassion into instruments of control, forcing an impossible choice between honoring your own needs or securing another's approval. When subjected to emotional blackmail, there is no correct answer. You feel exploited, withdraw, and are then labeled selfish, cold, or ungrateful. Often, this insidious tactic begins subtly. A partner might lament, "I'll probably be alone forever if you leave." A parent might sigh, "I sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me." A friend might warn, "If you don't take my side, don't count on me when you're in trouble." These aren't merely statements, they are emotional traps. Speak the wrong words, and you're made to feel monstrous. You aren't coerced, but feel emotionally cornered. What makes emotional blackmail so perilous is its masquerade as intimacy. It frequently comes from those you cherish the most, those who know exactly how to push your buttons. They don't need to shout or demand. They only hint at consequences, withdrawal of love, affection, access, or stability. Because you fear losing these bonds, you comply, not out of rightness, but out of fear. Over time, you begin feeling responsible for their moods, pain, and happiness. You sacrifice your truth to maintain peace. You silence your instincts to avoid disappointment. With every concession, you reinforce the belief that their love is conditional and that your worth hinges on satisfying their demands. True love doesn't demand emotional ransom. True love doesn't exact payment through guilt. Emotional blackmail demands, and it does so with a smile. Feigning ignorance is another manipulative strategy, whereby someone pretends not to remember, understand, or know something to evade responsibility, delay confrontation, or offload emotional labor onto you. It's not genuine confusion. It is strategic amnesia, a deliberate act of playing dumb to preserve control. This leaves you exhausted, doubting yourself, and carrying the burden of emotional work the manipulator refuses to do. Despite knowing exactly what they did, remembering promises made, boundaries crossed, or words that broke your heart, when confronted, they draw a blank. They blink, hesitate. "What are you talking about? I don't remember saying that. You misunderstood me." At your moment of need, they offer only fog and obfuscation. This tactic inflames frustration by turning truth into a labyrinth. You hold back not just your own emotions, but the heavy task of explaining reality to someone pretending not to grasp it. The more you seek clarity, the more they elude you, weaponizing your rising exasperation as evidence of your instability. You become overly defensive, accused of exaggeration or blowing things out of proportion. Feigning ignorance is a particularly cruel form of manipulation because it's passive. There are no raised voices, no insults, just a shrug, a vacant stare, a silent refusal to face you honestly. Yet the psychological impact is devastating. It makes you feel invisible, devalued, as if your experiences don't matter because someone can simply erase them by pretending they never existed. This tactic is often employed in toxic relationships to dodge emotional responsibility. A partner forgets a promise made. A friend claims not to realize their comment was hurtful. A colleague suddenly misunderstands their role in a failed project, but they certainly remember. They know that playing forgetful confuses you and shields them. Feigned ignorance's danger lies in its plausibility. You want to believe they just don't understand or are trying, that they aren't cruel. But deep down, you feel the tension, the coldness in their disregard, the way they look away as you beg for resolution. Because if they can convince you they don't know what they're doing, they'll never have to stop doing it. Preemptive invalidation is a manipulative tactic whereby someone dismisses your thoughts, feelings, or boundaries before you can even express them. They interrupt you at the root, making you doubt yourself even before you speak. It's a form of control disguised as anticipation rather than reaction. It tells you one frightening thing: your truth won't be accepted here. They say, "I already know what you're going to say. It's funny. You're not going to start your drama again, are you? You always blow everything out of proportion." Such assertions come before you utter a word or have a chance to explain, question, or share your perspective. That's the point. By assuming your emotional reaction and dismissing it as invalid before it even happens, they silence you without hearing the truth. Preemptive invalidation isn't mere ignoring, it's psychological suffocation. It says, don't even try. Your thoughts are predictable. Your feelings are wrong. Your voice isn't welcome. Over time, you learn this script. You hear their voice inside your head before you even speak. They're right. I overthink. I should just drop it. And that's exactly what you do. Each time, a piece of you disappears. This tactic is often deployed by those afraid of challenge, those who want to control their emotions without owning responsibility. By labeling feelings as irrational, dramatic, or selfish before they arise, they create an emotional battlefield where only their feelings matter. You become a caricature before you can defend yourself. You're insane, needy, overly emotional, even without saying anything. Preemptive invalidation is so toxic that it kills your autonomy before you've even had a chance to exercise it. It forces you to suppress instincts, distrust perceptions, and bury emotions deeply enough that they no longer threaten the manipulator's comfort. You censor yourself, not because you're wrong, but because you've been trained to believe no one wants to hear you, not even yourself. Cognitive overload disruption is a manipulative technique designed to overwhelm your thinking so thoroughly that you lose your ability to think critically, make sound decisions, or recognize manipulation in real time. This manipulation tactic functions by overwhelming your mind with excessive thoughts, demands, or stimuli simultaneously, disorienting your ability to separate signal from noise. The goal isn't to persuade you rationally, it's to confuse and force compliance. This technique targets one of the most vulnerable parts of your brain, your limited cognitive capacity. The human brain can handle only a certain amount of information at once before clarity gives way to chaos. Manipulators exploit this by creating mental paralysis through rapid speech, contradictory instructions, swift emotional shifts, relentless messaging, guilt-tripping during problem-solving, and piling tasks on top of mounting stress. Before you can question what's happening, you're already buried beneath it all. Cognitive overload frequently arises during abusive arguments where you are bombarded with accusations, excuses, and irrelevant distractions all at once. You attempt to resolve one issue, only to be hit with 5 more unexpectedly. You find yourself defending against accusations you never even heard. Logic disappears. You lose track of the original argument. Eventually, you shut down. Not because you agree, but because your brain is too exhausted to keep up. This tactic is also common in high-pressure sales, cult indoctrination, and workplace exploitation. Overwhelm the target with charts, statistics, deadlines, moralistic language, or fear-based messages until resistance wanes. When someone is too drained to think clearly, they say yes just to end the pressure. Manipulators weaponize this exhaustion to push decisions you would never have made with a clear mind. The most frightening facet is how easily it masquerades as passion, urgency, or even care. The manipulator may appear tense, emotionally involved, or even frantic. But behind that facade lies control. While you're busy untangling the emotional chaos they created, you don't ask the right questions. You don't say no. You don't leave. And once you're depleted, they offer relief on their terms. You feel grateful for the pause, for clarity, for silence. But you haven't found peace. You've been swept away by submission. You didn't choose this. You were too overwhelmed to resist. And that's how they win, by ensuring your mind is too busy to realize you're already losing yourself. Comparative devaluation is a covert yet cruel manipulation tactic that lowers your worth by constantly comparing you to others, real or imagined, to breed insecurity, control, and emotional dependence. It doesn't attack you directly. Instead, it places you in a shadow by elevating someone else. The message is clear. You're not enough. Manipulators may say things like, "Why can't you be more like her? He never complains the way you do. My ex handled this better. Others seem to appreciate me more." These comparisons drip casually, like passing remarks, but each one strikes with purpose. The goal isn't to compliment the other person. It's to make you feel inadequate, replaceable, or flawed. Because the more insecure you feel, the harder you'll work on yourself, the more you'll seek their approval, and the more power they'll gain. This tactic reprograms your emotional instincts. Instead of feeling loved, you feel measured. Every choice becomes a competition. Every interaction turns into a test. You constantly compare yourself to others' highlights. Comparative devaluation is a carefully crafted manipulative strategy designed to make you feel worthless. It ignites a thirst for approval that only the manipulator can satisfy, and they control when and if you receive it. Its destructive power lies in attacking your core identity. It doesn't merely say you made a mistake, it says you're inferior. Over time, you internalize these comparisons. You begin doubting your value, your worthiness, your intelligence, and your place in someone's life. You see yourself through their distorted lens, and you start to believe it. Just as your self-esteem starts crumbling, they offer you a crumb of praise, tempting you into chasing the fleeting feeling of finally being good enough. But that feeling never lasts. The essence of comparative devaluation is to sustain your striving, not your success, to keep you feeling perpetually behind the pedestal they've placed someone else upon, even if that person doesn't actually exist. It's not admiration. It's emotional sabotage disguised as feedback. Its aim isn't to inspire growth. It's to maintain just enough insecurity so you remain under their control. The idealization, devaluation, discard cycle is a manipulative psychological pattern frequently employed by narcissists and emotional abusers, designed to achieve total dominance over a person by systematically elevating them, then tearing them down, and eventually discarding them. This is not a relationship, it's a strategy, one that sustains your emotional dependence by stripping away your identity. It all begins with idealization, the love-bombing phase. You're flooded with affection, admiration, and attention. They call you perfect. They mirror your dreams, values, and words. You feel truly seen for the first time. The connection is intense, fast-moving, intoxicating, like destiny. But it's not love. It's a hook. They study you, uncover what makes you feel alive, only to use it to make you dependent. Then comes devaluation, and it strikes like a blow to the soul. The same person who once adored you starts with subtle critiques and escalates into mockery. They ridicule your flaws. They ignore your feelings and needs. They shift emotional energy without explanation. You chase the version of them who once made you feel safe. You work harder, give more, apologize for what you didn't do everything to bring back what was. But it's never the same. The pedestal they placed you on was never real. It was a launching point for your fall. The harder you try to regain their love, the further they retreat, until eventually they reach the final stage. Discard. They become a ghost. They replace you, accuse you, or worse, pretend you never mattered. You're left hollow, doubting everything. Was any of it ever real? You scour memories, messages, gestures, seeking proof the beginning wasn't a lie. But they've already moved on, to the next target, or to a new mask of perfection. What makes this cycle so devastating is how it adapts to your deepest desires, then weaponizes them against you. You weren't loved. You were used as a mirror, reflecting their fantasies. And once you ceased fulfilling that fantasy, once you needed something in return, they shattered the illusion and made you feel the problem was you all along. And worst of all, you still miss them, not for who they were, but for who they pretended to be. Plausible deniability is a manipulative tactic where an individual intentionally crafts their words, actions, or intentions to be vague, indirect, or ambiguous, so that when confronted, they can deny involvement with a carefully maintained poker face. It acts as a psychological smokescreen. They operate close enough to the edge to wound, manipulate, or deceive, but never blatantly enough for you to have definitive proof. And when you confront them, they flip the script. I didn't mean it like that. You're reading too much into it. I was just joking. It's gaslighting in a suit and tie, clean, calculated, and maddening. You know what they said. You felt the same, but they formulated it vaguely enough to make any accusation seem like your problem. You look like the one overanalyzing, too sensitive, or jumping to conclusions. They remain calm, poised, untouchable, while your reality starts to crumble. That is the cruelty of this tactic. It traps you between what happened and what you cannot prove. It silences you because every attempt at self-defense makes you appear unsure. The more you doubt it, the more you doubt yourself. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe you're making something out of nothing. But this is no nothing. It's precise cruelty designed to grant them total control without any accountability. This method is frequently wielded by narcissists, abusers, and manipulators who know the power of insinuation. They use subtle facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, and seemingly innocent words to deliver emotional blows without leaving clear evidence. This allows them to hurt you while continuing to play the victim or the saint. Plausible deniability is not just defense. It's part of a larger plan. They set the trap, then step back, just far enough to claim no involvement. And when your frustration or pain finally bursts forth, they retreat, smile, and say, "Wow, I had no idea you're so emotional." They win twice. First by hurting you, then by making you question whether it ever happened at all. The truth sandwich technique is a deceptive manipulation tactic that masks lies or harmful intentions between two layers of truth, making the falsehood easier to accept and harder to detect. It's a psychological ploy so deftly blending fact with fiction that the victim accepts the lie simply because it fits within a truthful context. It's not about logical persuasion. It's about disarming through structure. Here's how it works. The manipulator starts with an indisputable truth, something you recognize and agree with. This is the first slice of truth. It establishes rapport, builds trust, and sets an emotional tone. Then, nestled quietly in the middle, comes distortion, spin, manipulation, or misinformation. By the time you realize it, you're already nodding along. Finally, they close with another piece of truth, a comforting, familiar idea reinforcing everything they just said. This is the second slice. What you're left with is a complete sandwich that feels trustworthy, even though the center is rotten. For example, you know I've always supported your dreams. Truth. But lately, your behavior has been selfish and ungrateful, manipulative. Lie. Still, I care about you and just want the best for us. Truth. The middle strikes harder because it's framed by warmth and recognition. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like caring observation. And that's why you believe it, or at least stop resisting it. Essentially, false flattery is an emotional lure. It's designed to nourish your ego just enough to lower your defenses, tap into your deep need for validation, and coax you into seeking approval from someone who never truly meant what they said. Manipulators don't compliment you out of genuine admiration. They flatter you because they have studied you closely. They understand precisely what you long to hear. They observe the spark in your eyes when praised, the subtle shifts in your posture when someone acknowledges your value. So, they say exactly what you crave. You're the smartest person here. No one handles this like you do. I wish more people were as dedicated as you. These words sound generous, thoughtful, and kind, but they're a meticulously crafted performance aimed at making you compliant. False flattery becomes dangerous because it rapidly breeds emotional dependence. Praise stimulates dopamine release. It feels rewarding. It affirms your worth. You start associating those good feelings with that person. So the next time they want something, a favor, your silence, your agreement, they don't need to negotiate or threaten. They simply remind you how amazing you are. And in the desire to keep receiving that praise, you begin giving them what they want. This method is especially effective on those who have lingering doubts about their own value. If you're insecure, drained, or recovering from rejection, false flattery doesn't just sound pleasant, it feels essential. You cling to it as proof of your self-sufficiency, and that's when it starts controlling you. But flattery is never consistent. It's part of the manipulation. Today you're brilliant. Tomorrow you're questioned. One moment you're a star, the next you're ignored. This emotional whip unsettles you, pushing you to chase approval anew. It's not about building your confidence, it's about owning it, so they can take it away. You weren't seen, you were assessed. Compliments were not gifts. They were tools. And once you're emotionally tethered, that very praise that made you feel empowered becomes the rein they use to keep you submissive. Mirroring for rapport building is a psychological technique that uses subtle imitation to create a false sense of connection, trust, and emotional safety. It's a calculated act of echoing someone's voice, gestures, energy, interests, and even beliefs, not because you genuinely share them, but because you want them to believe you do. This occurs through reflection, where the manipulator becomes a human echo, syncing with you so precisely that your brain registers them as familiar, likable, and safe. This tactic is incredibly effective because it taps into something deeply embedded in human biology. We instinctively trust what feels like ourselves. When someone matches our rhythm, speaks at our pace, mirrors our posture, or reflects our values, it triggers neurological signals signaling belonging. You may not even realize it's happening. You simply feel understood, seen, and comfortable. And that's when your guard falls. Manipulators know this and study you carefully. If you're introverted, they soften their tone. If you use sarcasm, they adopt it too. If you like particular music, hobbies, or ideas, they suddenly share those interests. You start hearing lines like, "I've never told anyone this before," or "It's incredible how much we're alike." You feel like you've found a soulmate, a best friend, a missing piece. But it's not connection. It's a performance. Mirroring to build rapport is not genuine connection. It's trust acquisition. Its purpose is to create harmony, so you open up faster. False flattery serves as a calculated emotional lure designed to feed your ego just enough to let down your guard, tap into your craving for validation, and draw you into seeking approval from someone who never genuinely intended it. Manipulators don't flatter out of sincere admiration. They do so because they have carefully studied you. They understand precisely what words light you up inside. They watch your eyes sparkle with praise. Notice your subtle shifts in posture when someone recognizes your worth. And then they say exactly what you're eager to hear. "You're the most capable person here. No one handles things the way you do. I only wish everyone were as loyal as you." While it may sound generous, thoughtful, even kind, it's a rehearsed performance aimed at rendering you compliant. The danger lies in how swiftly false flattery creates emotional dependence. Compliments trigger dopamine release, producing pleasurable feelings and reaffirming your value. Soon, you link these good vibes with the flatterer. Later, when they want favors, silence, or agreement, they don't need to push or threaten. They just remind you how remarkable you are. And chasing that praise, you start giving in to their desires. This manipulation is especially potent for those with shaky self-esteem. If you doubt yourself, feel worn down, or struggle with feelings of abandonment, false flattery doesn't just sound nice. It feels crucial. You clutch it as proof of your self-worth, and then it controls you. But flattery is never consistent. It's a tool in manipulation's toolkit. Sometimes you're radiant and praised, other times you're doubted or ignored. The resulting emotional whiplash unsettles you, pushing you ever closer to seeking their approval. It isn't about building genuine confidence. It's about capturing and owning it. To take it away at will, you weren't truly seen. You were assessed and catalogued. These compliments were not gifts. They were instruments designed to bind and control. Once you're hooked emotionally, that very praise that empowered you becomes the leash the manipulator tightens to keep you tamed. Mirroring to build rapport is a sophisticated psychological strategy that employs subtle imitation to foster a false sense of connection, trust, and emotional safety. It involves deliberately echoing someone's voice, gestures, energy, interests, and even beliefs, not because the manipulator truly shares them, but to convince the target that they do. Through this reflective process, the manipulator becomes a precisely tuned human echo, aligning so closely that your brain registers them as familiar, likable, and safe. This technique is powerful because it taps into an ancient biological mechanism. Humans instinctively trust those who resemble themselves. When someone matches your speech rhythm, tone of voice, posture, or values, it activates primal brain signals signaling belonging. You won't consciously notice this process. You'll simply feel understood, seen, and comfortable, and that's when your defenses fall. Manipulators exploit this precisely. They study you. If you're an introvert, they soften their tone. If you lean on sarcasm, they adopt it too. If you cherish specific tastes, hobbies, or ideologies, suddenly you share those. You start hearing phrases like, "I've never told anyone this before," or "It's incredible how much we're alike." You feel like you found a soulmate, a kindred spirit, the missing piece you didn't know you sought. But it's a performance, not genuine connection. Mirroring to build rapport isn't about true emotional bonding. It's about trust, acquisition, and control. Its sole purpose is to create harmony, encouraging you to open up sooner and become more vulnerable. This is a tactic aimed at winning your trust. The purpose is to establish harmony, encouraging you to open up emotionally, bond quickly, and subsequently become more pliable. You often find this method employed in sales, seduction, cult recruitment, and toxic relationships alike. The mirroring is so expertly crafted that by the time any awareness slips away, you're already deeply, emotionally invested. Then, inevitably, they change. They stop reflecting your image and reveal a colder, more controlling version of themselves. You're left confused, even betrayed, yet a part of you clings on because you remember that initial connection, the feeling of being so profoundly understood. What you fail to grasp is that this version never truly existed. You were reflecting yourself back to gain your own trust. This is the peril of mirroring. It doesn't look like manipulation. It feels familiar and safe until it traps you. Jealousy induction is a psychological manipulation strategy where someone deliberately provokes feelings of jealousy in you to assert power, foster insecurity, or manipulate your behavior. It's no accident. It's deliberately engineered. This method strikes the most sensitive chords, your self-esteem, trust, and sense of security in a relationship. A manipulator doesn't foster connection through honesty or genuine attachment. They breed obsession through emotional destabilization. At first, it may be subtle. They mention someone else too often. They bring up an ex, give compliments to strangers, or flirt openly around you, then deny it with a smirk. You're overreacting. I was just being friendly. But deep inside, you feel it. The tightening in your chest, the sinking in your stomach, a silent war between your pride and panic. This is no coincidence. It is the essence of jealousy induction. When the manipulator senses you growing more comfortable, confident, or emotionally settled, they destabilize you with doubt. Suddenly you question your attractiveness, your significance, your place in their life. And as you spiral downward, they step back and watch, calm, controlled, feeding on your reaction. Your jealousy isn't a problem to them. It's a sign you care, that they've wrapped you around their finger. This tactic is especially cruel because it makes you feel like the problem. When confronted, they accuse you of jealousy, envy, or insecurity. You feel ashamed of reactions they deliberately caused. You start competing with ghosts, ex-partners, co-workers, or casual names dropped carelessly to provoke. Each time you try to set boundaries, they make you seem weak. I can't even talk to other people anymore. Over time, this manipulation doesn't just make you paranoid. It makes you dependent. You try harder to impress them. You lose sleep, wondering if you're enough. You give too much, plead too often, think too deeply, hoping that if you simply do more, they'll stop making you feel so replaceable. Yet here lies the darkest truth. They don't want the jealousy to end. They want to control you through it. They don't need to leave you for someone else. They only need you to believe they might. And in that fear, you surrender everything, slowly losing yourself. Mimicry as a bonding tool is a psychological technique that employs subtle imitation to create a deceptive sense of connection, trust, and emotional safety. This calculated act involves mirroring someone's voice, gestures, energy, interests, and even beliefs, not because you truly share them, but because you want them to believe you do. They manage the dynamic by creating an illusion of control on your part. But it's not true control. It's a burden, an unshared, inalienable, silently rejected burden. Such behavior thrives in various relationships, romantic, familial, professional, where one person carries disproportionate emotional responsibility. Over time, this imbalance doesn't just remain, it leads to burnout. You feel undervalued, invisible, exhausted. Meanwhile, they continue failing but smile, shrug, and say, "You're better at this anyway." But that isn't praise. That's the plan. Because if they consistently underperform long enough, you'll stop expecting any effort from them altogether. The false urgency framework is a high-pressure psychological manipulation technique designed to make you rush decisions by fabricating an artificial sense of immediate consequence. It doesn't rely on facts. It relies on fear. The manipulator distorts timing, creating the impression that now is your only chance, knowing full well that panic eclipses reason. You're not asked to decide, you're pushed to act, often under the guise of concern or opportunity. This chance comes once in a lifetime. If you don't act now, it'll be too late. We don't have time for discussion. You just have to trust me. These phrases carry zero informational value. They throttle your cognitive decision-making process, accelerating it to an extreme and throwing logic into emotional chaos. This tactic is wielded in abusive relationships to expand limits, sexual, financial, emotional. It's also a common sales ploy, forcing buyers to say yes before reading the fine print. Cult leaders, questionable employers, and controlling partners use it to dominate, depriving you of thought time. The clock ticks constantly, and that ticking is a trap. What makes this technique so dangerous is that it doesn't feel coercive. It feels urgent. Your brain interprets it as a critical moment. It switches into fight or flight mode, seeking the quickest escape from distress. So you agree. You submit. You say yes just to relieve the pressure, but truly, you're running from clarity. Because the manipulator knows that if you had even a few moments to reflect, you might make a different choice. Once you yield, they often retreat. The urgency vanishes as if it never existed. And then comes shame. You realize you were rushed, manipulated, boxed in. But by then you've already signed the paper, crossed the line, or made the promise. And they count on you staying silent, too embarrassed or confused to protest. False urgency framing works because it denies you pause. It punishes hesitation. It masks pressure as importance and stress as necessity. The more you feel overwhelmed, the likelier you are to surrender your power just to quiet the noise, just to feel safe again, even if that means sacrificing what truly matters. Deceptive framing is a manipulation technique that controls perception by carefully distorting how information is presented rather than what is actually said. It's not based on lies. It relies on selective truths, impressive language, and psychological tricks to paint something dangerous as harmless, or even virtuous. The issue isn't what you see. It's ensuring that you see it through their lens. This tactic is subtle, powerful, and alarmingly widespread. A manipulator never says, "I ignored your needs." Instead, they say, "I gave you space because I didn't want to suffocate you." They don't admit, "I broke your trust." Rather, they claim, "I made a mistake because I was overwhelmed, I was scared." They perform an act designed to provoke anger or doubt, but cloak it in words that elicit sympathy or guilt. The brilliance and danger of deceptive framing lie in how it grants the manipulator moral superiority. They recast themselves as the victim, martyr, or rational thinker. You find yourself feeling foolish for being upset, selfish for wanting more, confused about what actually happened. Your intuition whispers that something is wrong, yet their version sounds so reasonable, so logical, so noble that you begin doubting your own instincts. They distort context to fit their agenda. They highlight what benefits them and conveniently omit what does not. They do not deny facts. Instead, they spin the narrative so facts are perceived differently. Once they control the narrative, they govern your reaction too. You may even start defending them, because they fed you a version of reality where your pain makes no sense. In toxic relationships, deceptive framing justifies emotional neglect, betrayal, control, and even abuse. I check your messages only because I value our trust. I raise my voice because you don't listen unless I do. I'm not controlling. You're just making reckless choices. Every word redirects attention from them to you. Deceptive framing doesn't make you accept lies. It makes you reinterpret the truth until you willingly abandon it. And this surrender feels like your choice, though it was engineered from the start. Entrapment through mutual obligation is a psychological manipulation tactic that weaponizes generosity to forge invisible chains of guilt, pressure, and control. It exploits a deep human instinct. When someone gives us kindness, help, or gifts, we feel compelled to reciprocate. But manipulators turn this instinct into a trap. Their generosity isn't a gift. It's bait. It begins with unsolicited favors. They go out of their way to assist you. They buy expensive things. They defend you in front of others. They arrive when you're vulnerable and say exactly what you long to hear. You feel grateful, seen, protected. You tell yourself, "This is someone I can trust." But slowly the real cost of their kindness appears. They ask for something in return. your time, your silence, your loyalty, your body. And if you hesitate, guilt crashes down like a freight train. After all I've done for you, I probably shouldn't have bothered. You're just like everyone else, ungrateful. Suddenly, you realize you're failing to meet demands you never agreed to, yet now feel morally obligated to fulfill. This tactic works because it traps you in a moral bind. Saying no doesn't feel like setting a boundary. It feels like betrayal. So you compromise. You give in. You justify things you would never have tolerated, just to balance the scales. But the scales never balance. None of it was genuine goodwill. Each act of kindness was calculated. Every gesture of generosity is currency meant to place you inside their emotional pocket. In relationships, this becomes emotional blackmail. You stay longer than you should. You endure more than you can bear. Because you feel you owe them your loyalty, your forgiveness, your silence. But you don't. True giving never demands repayment. True kindness comes without strings attached. Those who manipulate rely on your inherent goodness to keep you from walking away. They craft a facade of bonding by offering something of worth only to wield it as a leash. The more generous they appear, the harder it becomes to acknowledge the trap. Make no mistake, this wasn't affection. It was a transaction. And whenever you seek to reclaim your independence, they'll remind you of their investments. Thus, you remain mindful of the debt. Triadic closure manipulation. Triadic closure manipulation is a psychological strategy where the manipulator deliberately forms or exploits relationships among individuals, often involving you and a third party, to shape the story, forge alliances, and subtly isolate or sway you. It draws from a core social psychology concept. If person A is connected to person B, and person B to person C, trust is more likely to emerge between A and C. The manipulator leverages this trust triangle to gain emotional leverage over everyone involved. At first, it feels harmless, even beneficial. The manipulator fosters closeness. You'd get along great. Let me introduce you to someone who truly gets me. They'll adore them. They position themselves at the center as the connector, the bridge. Yet, you don't realize they're meticulously curating what each person learns about the others. They plant subtle doubts. Just a heads up. She can be a bit intense at times. Don't take his comments too literally. He has an odd sense of humor. You enter the new bond already biased, already primed for influence without knowing it. Then the real control begins. They exploit the triangle to distort views, sway opinions, and shift blame. If you call them out on a falsehood, they respond, "Well, even person D backs me up." If you question their commitment, they say, "I shared everything with them. We're all aligned." Now you're not just facing the manipulator. You're defending against an engineered dynamic designed to corner you. This is particularly devastating in romantic or social circles. You feel attacked, even if no direct assault occurs. You doubt your gut feelings because someone else consistently sides with them. You start feeling irrational, suspicious, isolated. But what you're experiencing isn't delusion. It's engineered social influence by someone who knows. Alliances are built not on transparency, but on carefully orchestrated distortions. Triadic closure manipulation turns trust into a snare. It transforms bonds into dominance. By the time you see the triangle wasn't meant to include you, but to contain you, you've already silenced your voice, eroded your self-trust, and begun questioning who's truly in your corner. Halo effect exploitation. Halo effect exploitation is a manipulative psychological approach that capitalizes on your favorable impression of one trait, like attractiveness, charisma, intelligence, or achievement, to blind you to red flags in other areas. The manipulator doesn't alter who they are. They simply amplify one aspect so brightly that you overlook the shadows lurking elsewhere. This isn't charm. It's misdirection. And it succeeds because your mind craves consistency. The halo effect is a cognitive bias where a single positive attribute leads to an unconscious assumption that the entire person must be positive too. If someone is good-looking, we infer they're kind. If they're charismatic, we assume they're trustworthy. If they're accomplished, we presume they're balanced emotionally. But manipulators exploit this bias strategically. They hone the dazzling element while concealing their flaws behind it. They might dress impeccably, speak with assurance, and effortlessly draw laughs from crowds. They could appear generous in social settings, affectionate early on, or intellectually sharp in discussions. These qualities make you feel secure, valued, fortunate, and as your brain fills in the gaps, you stop scrutinizing. You rationalize their detachment, harshness, or dominance. They're just under pressure. They didn't intend that. That's not who they really are, but it is. You just can't see it clearly because the glow is now obscuring your vision. This manipulation is especially perilous because it's subtle. It doesn't shout abuse, it murmurs allure. It's the executive who leads with vision but exploits power privately. The romantic interest who makes you feel cherished publicly, but withholds intimacy alone. The perfect companion who quietly undermines or competes with you. You trust them because they shine. But that shine isn't authentic. It's a shield. And once you start questioning when you finally highlight inconsistencies or set limits, you face disbelief, not just from them, but from others. Because they've so masterfully leveraged the halo effect that people see their brilliance, not their harm. You're not only battling their tactics, you're combating the illusion they've crafted, and the world is already aligned with them. Desensitization via incremental exposure. Desensitization via incremental exposure is a psychological manipulation tactic that conditions you to accept unacceptable conduct not all at once, but through small, barely perceptible increments. It's a gradual erosion of your boundaries via repeated minor infractions that escalate over time, until what once alarmed you feels ordinary. It doesn't start with outright insults. It begins with unease. And it unfolds so slowly that you don't even notice how deeply you've been drawn in. Initially, it might be a mildly sarcastic remark, a dismissive observation, a broken commitment. It unsettles you, but they apologize or downplay it. So you let it slide. Then it recurs, perhaps slightly intensified. And again, the behavior worsens progressively, not enough to demand immediate confrontation, but sufficient to leave an imprint. That's how desensitization operates. Your nervous system, which once raised alarms, begins to quiet. You adapt to the stress, the discomfort, the mood swings. You tell yourself, it's not that terrible. You adjust. You lower your standards. You convince yourself you're mature, empathetic, patient, when in reality, you're being trained. The manipulator knows precisely what they're doing. If they unleashed full cruelty from day one, you'd flee. But by inflicting harm gradually, they condition you to endure. They reset your baseline for what's normal in interactions. And by the time the dynamic turns overtly harmful, you're already numb emotionally. Your instincts dull. your tolerance rises. Your fight response shifts to resignation. This tactic appears in abusive partnerships, coercive groups, authoritarian regimes, even dysfunctional teams. It works because it doesn't resemble brainwashing. It mimics adaptation. You believe you're coping well, that you're resilient enough to stay composed, that your compassion counts, but actually you're being reprogrammed to tolerate the intolerable bit by bit. And the most chilling part is, you often don't realize how far you've gone until an outsider asks, "How do you put up with that?" That moment doesn't feel like clarity. It feels like waking in a house already engulfed in flames. Vulnerability. Mirroring. Vulnerability mirroring is an intensely manipulative psychological method where someone feigns sharing your deepest fears, wounds, or emotional scars not to bond, but to dominate. It's not genuine intimacy. It's a fabricated emotional mirage designed to rapidly build trust, lower your defenses, and create a sense that you're profoundly seen. But it's entirely scripted. This isn't shared suffering. It's appropriated pain. It all starts when you open up. You share something painful, perhaps a childhood injury, a betrayal, a personal insecurity. Most people respond with empathy, but the manipulator spots an opening. Moments later, or even instantly, they echo it back. That's insane. I've been through the exact same. They mimic your tone. They parrot your phrasing. They replicate your emotional intensity like a reflection. In that instant, you feel a profound connection, as if you found someone who truly comprehends. But they don't. They're not revealing. They're analyzing you. Each vulnerability you expose becomes their blueprint. And every time they mirror one of your hurts, you bond deeper, because it doesn't feel like deception. It feels like destiny, like you're no longer alone, like this person was meant to cross your path. This tactic is dangerously potent for how swiftly it forges false closeness. You find yourself trusting them more than long-time acquaintances. You accelerate emotional investments and overlook warning signs because someone finally gets you. That similarity becomes emotional adhesive. You attach to the echo, unaware of its fabrication. Then the power shift commences. What you thought was mutual becomes leverage. They know your fears, triggers, weak spots. They wield this to guilt-trip you, silence you, manipulate outcomes. You feel exposed, disoriented. How could someone who understood you so deeply turn distant, cruel, or indifferent? Because they never truly understood. They duplicated you. They built a false self from your narrative to breach your trust. And once inside, they didn't offer healing. They exploited the open wound. They prompted your disclosure. This isn't emotional bonding. It's emotional hacking. By the time you realize they wore a mask crafted from your pain, you're already vulnerable, already bound, already ensnared. Shame anchoring. Shame anchoring is a profoundly manipulative psychological technique where someone deliberately links feelings of shame to specific behaviors, desires, or expressions of self, so that every time you attempt to act freely, an invisible weight of humiliation pulls you back. It's not just about making you feel bad in the moment. It's about embedding shame like a hook in your psyche, so it drags you down repeatedly long after the words were spoken. The manipulator turns your vulnerabilities against you, what you cherish, what you take pride in, or even what you've never dared to share. Perhaps you confided in a passion, a struggle, a fragile part of yourself, and instead of support, they smirked, rolled their eyes, or delivered a cutting remark. That's so immature. No one wants to hear about your issues all the time. Why do you think that's impressive anyway? They anchor shame to the moment, to you, and you feel it. A sinking, hot rush of embarrassment. You might laugh it off, change the subject, tell yourself they didn't mean it, but the damage is done. Because next time you try to express that part of yourself, an inner voice whispers, "Don't recall how foolish you looked," and you freeze. That's the power of shame anchoring. It doesn't require repetition. It demands precision. One well-timed strike in a vulnerable instant, and the emotional reflex is set. Once triggered, the manipulator no longer needs to shame you. You'll do it yourself. You'll mute your own voice, hide your joy, suppress your opinions. This tactic is particularly cruel because it's often disguised as humor or candor. They'll say, "I'm just being honest," or "Can't you take a joke?" So if you confront them, you seem overly sensitive, and the shame doubles. Eventually, you stop sharing. You stop shining. You shrink. Not because someone loudly broke you, but because they tethered shame to the parts of you that once felt alive. And now even freedom feels risky. Not because it is, but because someone taught you it should be. Selective memory manipulation. Selective memory manipulation is a deeply deceptive psychological tactic where the manipulator intentionally recalls only certain parts of events, specifically those that serve their narrative, conveniently forgetting the rest. It's not about memory lapses. It's about rewriting reality to control perception, evade accountability, and make you doubt your own recollections. Over time, this doesn't just distort what happened, it warps who you believe you are. The manipulator cherry-picks moments that benefit them. They remember every favor they've done for you, but none you've done for them. They recall your outbursts of anger, but never the weeks of provocation that led to them. They cling to one of your mistakes, but overlook countless times they've hurt you. They treat partial truth as the full story. And every time you try to fill in the blanks, you're met with denial, deflection, or a smug. I recall it differently. This tactic is veiled gaslighting. It doesn't deny your reality outright. It edits it just enough to seed doubt. You start replaying moments in your head, wondering if you're overreacting, if your memories are skewed, if you're being unfair. But you're not. You're being rewritten by someone who prioritizes narrative control over honesty. In arguments, selective memory manipulation becomes a weapon of omission and silence. They recall what casts them as the victim and omit what makes them accountable. They say, "I never raise my voice," even though they have, just not publicly. They insist, "You always twist things," while twisting the timeline, the tone, the truth. Over time, this manipulation erodes you internally. You begin questioning your emotional instincts. You hesitate before voicing valid concerns because you're unsure if you remember anything correctly. And that hesitation is the manipulator's victory. Because if you can't trust your memory, you start relying on theirs. You hand over your reality as a tool, and they use it to shape your story. What you're left with isn't just confusion. It's an identity crisis. Because if they decide what happened, they decide who you were in that moment. And gradually your truth is supplanted by their fiction until even you're unsure which version is real. Unpredictable reward system. The unpredictable reward system is a manipulation technique that functions like an emotional gamble. It traps you in a cycle of confusion, craving, and despair. By offering praise, affection, or approval inconsistently and erratically. One moment you're adored, the next ignored. Then suddenly they're warm again, just enough to keep you hooked, hopeful, chasing. This tactic isn't about love. It's about control. And it works by turning your nervous system into a slot machine. In the early stages, the manipulator showers you with attention. Constant messages, compliments, affection so intense it sparks euphoria. This hooks you, but then without warning they withdraw. They stop responding. They act distant, cool, distracted. You panic. What did I do? Did I upset them? Have I changed? The silence hurts. But as soon as you start pulling away or questioning the bond, they return. Affectionate, reassuring, perhaps even apologetic. And in that moment, the relief you feel floods your system with dopamine. Not just joy, but relief. This hit is stronger than steady affection because it follows pain. And now you're addicted not to them, but to the pursuit, the uncertainty, the pattern you're desperate to break. You start trying harder to please them. You suppress your needs to avoid pushing them away. You analyze every word, glance, moment for clues on how to earn the reward again. And they dole it out just enough to sustain hope, but never enough to feel secure. That's how the unpredictable reward system breeds emotional addiction. The inconsistency is the trap. If they treated you poorly all the time, you'd leave. If they treated you well consistently, you'd relax. But by mixing cruelty with kindness, they keep your emotions volatile and your focus entirely on them. You begin blaming yourself for their detachment. You start rewarding them for hurting you simply because they stopped. And over time, you forget what real love feels like. You forget that peace shouldn't feel like winning a game you never asked to play. Phantom norms. Phantom norms are unspoken, invisible rules that the manipulator invents and enforces as if they're universally understood and morally absolute. But they're not. These are fabricated expectations disguised as common sense. You never agreed to them. They were never stated outright. But when you breach one, you're punished as if you've committed a grave betrayal. This tactic doesn't just control your actions, it reprograms your reality. The manipulator deploys phantom norms to mold your behavior without consent. They imply standards you should inherently know. Everyone knows you can't do that. I shouldn't have to spell this out for you. It's basic decency. But if you pause and reflect, nothing about these rules is ever reciprocal, explicit, or fair. They're vague, shifting, and entirely in the manipulator's favor. Maybe you didn't reply to a message fast enough. Maybe you didn't invite them to something you thought wouldn't interest them. Suddenly you're met with coldness, guilt-tripping, or accusations of selfishness. You try to defend yourself, but the more you explain, the worse it gets. Because it's not about right or wrong, it's about enforcing a rule you didn't know existed until you violated it. This tactic creates a constant sense of walking on eggshells. You start overthinking every move, not because you've done wrong, but because you fear breaking another unseen rule. You lose spontaneity, authenticity, confidence. You become hypervigilant, scanning for clues on what's acceptable, trying to stay in the manipulator's good graces without knowing the criteria. Phantom norms also breed guilt and shame. You internalize the idea that you're somehow failing socially, emotionally, or morally because someone keeps reacting as if you should have known better. But the truth is, you're not failing. You're being played. These rules aren't universal. They're custom-built to control you, throw you off balance, make you compliant, and apologize for things you never deemed wrong in the first place. What makes phantom norms so destructive is their invisibility. There's no clear line to push against. Only a perpetual unspoken threat that you'll be judged, shamed, or rejected if you don't play by rules known only to one person, who alters them whenever it suits their agenda. Echo agreement trap. The echo agreement trap is a manipulative tactic that disguises control as consensus. It operates by reflecting your thoughts, values, dreams, or frustrations so convincingly that you believe you finally found someone who truly understands you. But what seems like profound emotional resonance is actually a performance meant to weaken your guards, earn your trust, and set the stage for further exploitation. At first, it's intoxicating. You express something vulnerable, your fears about relationships, your childhood scars, your aspirations for independence, and they mirror it with stunning accuracy. I've always felt that way too. It's like you're voicing everything I've thought. No one else has ever gotten me like you do. You feel seen, validated, safe. You lower your vigilance and open up more. And each time you do, they echo your ideas like a mirror, saying exactly what you need to hear. This isn't dialogue, it's emotional seduction. But here's the trap. The agreement isn't genuine. It's tactical. The manipulator isn't sharing their truth. They're harvesting yours. They memorize your values, language, emotional patterns to influence you later. Because when someone echoes your mind, your brain interprets it as trust, as truth. And once they secure that trust, the shift begins. Suddenly the agreement wavers. You're gently questioned, corrected, subtly redirected. But since you're already so deeply connected, you assume you're the one misunderstanding. So you adjust. You conform. You start aligning with their values, thinking they were always yours. This tactic is common in toxic bonds, coercive groups, manipulative friendships, and abusive dynamics. It doesn't start with dominance. It begins with an echo. And once you hear your own voice coming from their mouth, you stop defending it. You hand it over willingly. The echo agreement trap doesn't steal your identity outright. It makes you share it piece by piece until one day you look in the mirror and see someone else's reflection, smiling back. False scarcity. Illusion. The false scarcity illusion is a psychological manipulation tactic that fabricates the perception that something, love, opportunities, attention, time, is extremely limited, even when it's not, to compel you to act, comply, or develop emotional dependence. It taps into your survival instincts, triggering urgency, fear of loss, and a desperate need to secure it before it's gone. But this shortage isn't real. It's engineered to make you feel replaceable, rushed, and inadequate. The manipulator might imply they're in high demand. Others would do anything to be with me. You're fortunate I chose you. This is your only shot. They subtly suggest you could lose them at any moment, or that others are lining up to take your place, in romantic, professional, or emotional contexts. You start believing you must earn what they offer. You begin fearing mistakes. You chase validation, afraid that if you don't act quickly or stay perfect, someone else will claim what you thought was yours. This illusion works because it preys on your deepest insecurities. It makes you feel the desired thing is out of reach and that you must fight to hold it. It reframes love, attention, and chances as something you're lucky to have, not something you deserve. You forget your worth. You rush for affection, tiptoe around issues, and tolerate treatment you'd never accept, if not for the fear of losing the little you think is offered. False scarcity is used in romantic manipulations, especially by narcissists, to keep partners compliant. It's employed in toxic work cultures where employees are told such jobs are rare. It's seen in marketing, cult recruitment, and abusive friendships. It doesn't matter if what they offer is truly valuable. What matters is you believe in its rarity. But here's the grim reality. The scarcity is a setup. The manipulator often offers the same to others. The urgency is theater. They weren't planning to leave, they just wanted to see how far you'd go to hold them. And by the time you realize there was never a shortage, you've already invested emotionally, financially, physically, trying to cling to something that wasn't going anywhere because it wasn't love or opportunity. It was leverage wrapped in fear, fueled by illusion. Tactical praise. Withholding. Tactical praise withholding is a psychological manipulation tactic where affection, approval, and validation are given early and abundantly, then abruptly and strategically retracted. This creates a silent emotional void that drives you to scramble for what was once freely given. Praise becomes the drug, and its absence the withdrawal. At first, the praise is exhilarating. You're told how wonderful, attractive, resilient, or special you are. Every gesture meets admiration. You feel chosen, elevated, almost revered. This phase isn't accidental. It's a setup. The manipulator elevates you not to honor you, but to create a high they can later control. Then, just as suddenly, the praise stops. Not in anger, but in silence. What once earned you warmth now yields nothing. No smiles, no compliments, no affirmation. You sense the change, and your nervous system panics. Did I do something wrong? Have I changed? What do they see now that they didn't before? That's the trap. The withholding isn't random. It's deliberate. It's meant to breed insecurity, make you self-doubt, and provoke desperate efforts to regain the manipulator's approval. You try harder. You apologize for things you didn't do. You mold yourself into the version of you they seemed to like before. Not because you want to, but because you need to feel valued again. What makes this tactic so dangerous is that the praise will return, but only in small, unpredictable doses, just enough to rehook you and reward compliance. Then, as soon as you stabilize, it vanishes again. This cycle fosters emotional dependence that feels exactly like addiction. The longer the abstinence, the more euphoric the praise feels when it finally returns. You don't realize you're being conditioned, trained to associate their approval with your worth. And by the time you do, you've already surrendered parts of yourself to get it back. Tactical praise withholding isn't about love. It's about power. It's not just what they give, but what they take away, and how desperately they make you miss it. Distorted reciprocity. Distorted reciprocity is a psychological manipulation tactic that twists the natural give and take in human connections into a weapon. The beautiful human instinct to return kindness becomes a tool for control, guilt, and obligation. It's not about mutual respect or balanced exchange. It's about secretly keeping score, then using that hidden ledger to make you feel indebted, far beyond what you ever agreed to give. At first, the manipulator seems incredibly giving. They go out of their way to assist you, provide something, offer emotional support, perhaps even financial aid. You're caught off guard. It feels sincere. You start trusting. Maybe you even feel grateful. But soon the tone shifts. They begin reminding you, overtly or subtly, of everything they've done. After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me. I guess I care more than you do. What once felt like a gift now feels like a debt. The trap of distorted reciprocity lies in how unspoken it is initially. You were never told there were conditions. You never asked for transactional help. But once you accept it, the manipulator changes the rules. Suddenly they expect unquestioning loyalty, endless emotional labor, immediate favors, silence, submission. And if you resist, you're ungrateful, you're selfish, you're harmful. This tactic is especially damaging because it turns your kindness into a vulnerability. You feel guilty for having needs. You feel wrong for saying no. You start overcompensating, doing more than you want, giving more than you can, just to balance the scales. But the scales are rigged. No matter how much you give, it's never enough, because the manipulator constantly inflates what they've done and minimizes your returns. Distorted reciprocity doesn't just control behavior. It corrodes self-worth. It makes you believe the only way to maintain love, security, or peace is to perpetually pay off an invisible emotional debt. You lose the ability to say no without guilt. You stop asking for what you need. You become a servant to a balance that exists only in their mind. You were never in a relationship. You were in a transaction you didn't sign up for, one where the price keeps rising and the bill is always held over your head like a loaded gun. Neuro-linguistic pattern disruption. Neuro-linguistic pattern disruption is a psychological manipulation tactic that interrupts your natural thinking and behavioral patterns through confusion, contradiction, or emotional shock, creating a temporary mental vulnerability that the manipulator exploits to implant suggestions, steer decisions, or push boundaries you'd normally hold firm. It doesn't overpower you with force. It hacks your mind by derailing it. Our brains thrive on predictability. When conversations follow an expected flow, your subconscious maintains control. But when something suddenly doesn't make sense, a bizarre question, an absurd compliment, an emotional pivot that doesn't fit, your cognitive processes stall. Your conscious mind kicks in, trying to make sense of what just happened. And in that brief window of disarray, you're open. That's when the manipulator strikes. In a tense moment, they might say something odd, like interrupting an argument with a random joke, a profound philosophical query, or an offbeat compliment. Why do you always look so composed when you're upset? It's almost admirable. Now your anger is halted. Your mental flow is off track. You pause. And in that pause, the emotional tone of the interaction shifts, controlled by them. In darker scenarios, they might use pattern disruption during high emotions, dropping a shocking confession, suddenly apologizing, or erupting unexpectedly amid calm talk. The chaos shocks your nervous system into a heightened reactive state where you stop thinking logically and start reacting. And they guide you through that chaos with their words, nudging your thoughts exactly where they want. This tactic is often used in cult induction, aggressive sales, psychological abuse, and seduction strategies. It's not about making sense. It's about keeping you searching for sense long enough to disarm you. What makes it so unsettling is how subtly it operates. You walk away from the conversation feeling off-kilter, unsure why you conceded, why you changed your mind, or why you suddenly feel sympathy for someone who just wronged you. But the truth is, you didn't decide. They disrupted. And while you scrambled for footing, they paved your path. Strategic self-disclosure. Strategic self-disclosure is a manipulative tactic where someone shares personal information not to build authentic connection, but to lower your defenses, create false intimacy, and extract trust, secrets, or loyalty from you. It resembles vulnerability, but it's merely a performance. A carefully timed revelation designed not to bond, but to disarm. At first, it's disarming. You're talking to someone who suddenly opens up. They recount painful memories, a dark history, a personal struggle. Maybe it's about a harmful ex, a fractured family, a traumatic past. It catches you off guard. You feel honored, selected. You think they trust me, and without realizing, you start reciprocating. That's the trap. Because the manipulator isn't vulnerable. They're strategic. They share just enough pain to seem human, enough details to feel real, but not enough to truly expose emotionally. Their story is rehearsed, selectively edited to evoke your sympathy and prompt an emotional response. And once you start pouring out in return, they win. This tactic is especially effective in early relationships, interviews, political maneuvering, or cult recruitment. You attach quickly. You cross boundaries prematurely. You trust faster than you should. Why not? They went first. They bared their soul. But you don't see how often they recycle the same script with others. How many people has that same tale ensnared? Strategic self-disclosure is so dangerous because it feels like love, honesty, or profound connection. It taps your compassion and bypasses your logical barriers. You start seeing safety in this person, someone who understands you, but they're not interested in you. They're after your openness, your secrets, your emotional availability. Because the more you reveal, the easier you are to influence, manipulate, control. Eventually, the cracks show. Their stories don't add up. The empathy fades, and the same person who once opened their heart to you uses what you shared against you, not from passion, but from calculation, because their vulnerability was never about truth. It was a mask to uncover yours. Ambiguity control. Ambiguity control is a psychological manipulation tactic rooted in deliberate uncertainty. It's when someone withholds clarity, avoids commitments, or sends mixed signals, not because they're confused, but because they want you confused too. This strategy keeps you guessing, overthinking, and emotionally chasing answers that never arrive. By controlling the level of vagueness in a relationship or conversation, the manipulator controls you. At first, it might seem like a minor misunderstanding. You ask where you stand, and they reply with something like, "Let's just see where this goes." Or, "I'm not into labels." You express how their actions hurt you, and they respond, "You're reading too much into it." Their words don't contradict you outright. They just never commit to anything concrete. And that uncertainty becomes a leash. Because when someone refuses to define the dynamic, all the emotional labor falls on you. You try reading between the lines. You analyze texts, replay conversations, search for hidden meanings. You contort yourself. You adapt. All to gain clarity they intentionally deny. That's the game. The more unclear they are, the harder you work to understand them. This tactic gives the manipulator immense power without seeming cruel. They don't yell, they don't accuse, they just float, always slightly out of reach. You can't hold them accountable because technically they never promised anything. They never said, "I love you." They never said, "We're exclusive." They never said, "I care." But they also never said they don't. So you stay. You stay for the what-ifs, the potential, the moments when it all feels almost real. And those moments, those crumbs of warmth, attention, or affection, are enough to keep you hoping, trying, waiting. Ambiguity control is so effective because it feels like your own insecurity. You think the issue is your anxiety, your impatience, your inability to just go with the flow. But the truth is, you're not lost. You're being kept lost. Because as long as you're stuck in the fog, they never have to show you who they really are. Value extraction framing. Value extraction framing is a psychological manipulation tactic where the manipulator positions every interaction, relationship, or exchange in terms of what you can provide and what they can gain. It's not about mutual benefit. It's about subtly training you to measure your worth by your utility. The unspoken message is clear. You're valuable only as much as what you offer. It starts subtly. They praise you for your helpfulness, selflessness, or how you stand out from others. They say things like, "You're always there when I need you," or "I don't know what I'd do without you." At first, it feels flattering. You feel needed, essential. You start taking pride in your ability to assist, fix, or sacrifice. But beneath the surface, a quiet truth emerges. If I stop being useful, the care stops. This framing completely alters the relationship dynamic. You begin anticipating their needs before your own. You overextend, give too much, overburden yourself, just to maintain your place in their life. You stop asking for things because you fear seeming demanding or high maintenance. They don't have to say it directly. You've learned the rule. Your value is conditional. The manipulator reinforces this by reacting negatively when you assert boundaries or say no. Suddenly, you're no longer the wonderful friend, partner, or colleague. You're difficult. You're distant. You're replaceable. They make you feel like a burden for needing rest, space, or reciprocity. And just like that, you're back to proving your worth, not through affection, but through service. Value extraction framing is especially destructive because it doesn't scream abuse. It whispers inadequacy. You're never told outright you're worthless. You're just slowly conditioned to believe your needs matter less than your function. That care must be earned through sacrifice. That peace is maintained by providing, fixing, pleasing, delivering. Over time, you start fading. Not all at once, but in small, silent ways. You stop expressing yourself. You stop being messy, real, human. You become efficient, predictable, emotionally available only when it suits them. And they thrive, feeding off your efforts, your energy, your silence, while you gradually forget that your worth was never meant to be bargained for. Fear then relief technique. The fear then relief technique is a psychological manipulation tactic that induces anxiety, panic, or dread in you, then suddenly removes the threat, creating emotional vulnerability, compliance, and gratitude. It doesn't just affect your behavior, it hijacks your nervous system. And it works because in the moment fear subsides, your brain releases a chemical rush of relief so powerful that you're more likely to trust, agree, or yield to the very person who scared you initially. This tactic begins with fear. It could be a threat, a lie, a misunderstanding, or a high-stakes moment. A boss says, "We need to discuss your job status right now." A partner declares, "I can't do this anymore." A parent goes silent after you share something vulnerable. The fear builds rapidly. Your stomach tightens. Your breathing quickens. Your thoughts spiral. You brace for impact. Then, just as the fear peaks, it's gone. Just kidding. It's not that big a deal. Don't worry, I was testing you. Relief floods in. And it's engineered so you emotionally fall into the arms of the person who just made your heart race. In that instant, you're overwhelmed with gratitude, not clarity. You don't question why they frightened you. You don't probe the manipulation. You just feel thankful it's not as bad as it almost was. And that gratitude fosters a twisted loyalty. They seem like saviors, even though they were the threat's source. This tactic is widely used in interrogations, sales pitches, toxic relationships, and emotional abuse. The emotional roller coaster leaves you too disoriented to resist, too drained to argue. You comply not because it makes sense, but because you desperately crave the safety they've made you associate with them. The danger of the fear then relief technique is that it breeds dependence. You start linking your peace to the person who took it away. And soon you stop avoiding the danger. You cling to the illusion of security, even when you should run from the one who created the fear in the first place. Reverse mirroring. Reverse mirroring is a subtle yet powerful psychological manipulation tactic, where the manipulator reflects you back to yourself, not to connect, but to blend into you, disarm you, and secure your trust. Unlike traditional mirroring, where someone mimics your gestures, tone, or energy to build rapport, reverse mirroring flips the script. The manipulator adopts your persona to become exactly who you want to see. Not because that's who they are, but because that's how they infiltrate your mind. It all starts with uncanny synchronicity. You mention a passion, and they love it too. You share beliefs, and they've felt the same. Your humor, your wounds, your worldview, it's all echoed in them. You're not just heard, you're recognized. You start thinking, no one has ever understood me like this. And that's exactly what they want you to believe. But what's really happening is psychological camouflage. The manipulator isn't connecting with you. They're constructing an image from your own reflections. The more you reveal, the more material they gather. Your language becomes theirs. Your emotional rhythms become their mask. It feels like fate. In reality, it's design. This tactic is incredibly effective in romantic entanglements, sales, cult grooming, and even phony friendships. You attach rapidly. You trust sooner than usual. You ignore red flags because this person feels familiar. But that familiarity isn't real. It's constructed from everything you've disclosed. They haven't shown you who they are. They've shown you who you are. Reverse mirroring through a polished, enticing lens. The peril of reverse mirroring is how it generates false intimacy while completely hiding the true self. You fall for the reflection. You give yourself to someone who doesn't exist. And when the mask eventually slips, when their real behavior contradicts the persona they echoed, you feel betrayed, confused, even ashamed. You wonder, how could I have been so wrong? But you weren't mistaken. You were targeted. The manipulator never showed up to be discovered. They arrived to be accepted. And the fastest way to earn your acceptance is to become a version of you, not for love, not for connection, but for access, influence, and control. They copied you not to get closer. They copied you so you'd never see who they really are. Social proof, mystification. Social proof mystification is a psychological manipulative tactic that fabricates or exaggerates popularity, approval, or consensus to influence your beliefs, choices, and trust. It exploits one of humanity's strongest behavioral principles. If others believe it, it must be true. But here, the others are carefully curated illusions, selectively presented or outright invented, to make you doubt your instincts and follow a crowd that doesn't actually exist. It starts subtly. The manipulator references vague people who agree with them. Everyone else thinks I'm right. My friends say you're overreacting. No one has ever had an issue with me. They deliver these claims not as facts, but as anchors. And your brain, wired for social survival, starts wavering. If you're the only one seeing the problem, maybe the problem is you. Maybe your perception is off. Maybe you're unreasonable. But here's the truth. Often, there are no everyone, no friends opining, no silent consensus. There's just you, self-doubting because of a lie presented as evidence. Social proof mystification is especially potent in group settings or online environments. The manipulator might fake endorsements, cite anonymous support, or align with authority figures who never endorsed them. They could surround themselves with default agreeers or harshly punish dissent, turning silence into complicity. They don't need real validation. They just need to appear backed by numbers. And once you believe there's a group behind them, it becomes harder to stand your ground. You stay silent to avoid being an outcast. You conform to evade isolation. And that's the goal, to make resistance seem socially risky. Over time, you might even adopt their narrative just to feel safe, to belong, to survive in a world where your truth feels outnumbered, even if it's the only truth that's real. Social proof mystification doesn't wield facts. It wields fear of exclusion. And it works not because you're weak, but because humans were built to follow the herd, even when the herd is a ghost. False equivalence. Framing. False equivalence framing is a psychological manipulation tactic that distorts logic by equating two dissimilar things as if they're equal in weight, fault, or impact. It's not an argument. It's a ploy. A way to blur moral lines, shift blame, and make you feel just as culpable or flawed as the manipulator. It's the art of saying, well, you do it too. Even when what they've done cuts deeper, hits harder, or crosses boundaries you never touched. This tactic thrives in conflict. You accuse someone of deceit, and they counter, well, you've kept secrets too. You call out their control, and they retort, you can be controlling sometimes. Don't act like a saint. It sounds balanced, fair, reasonable, but it's not. Because what they're doing isn't owning responsibility. They're diluting it, warping the situation until everything seems murky, until you can't distinguish offender from victim. False equivalence is especially disorienting because it targets your empathy. You want to be fair. You're willing to own your flaws. So when someone flips the script, you pause, you turn inward, and while you're busy self-reflecting, they slip away from consequences. The more you bend to seem equal, the more power they reclaim. This tactic also surfaces in toxic bonds, where one person crosses a clear line, cheating, gaslighting, or emotional harm, then portrays your reaction as equally damaging. Yelling at me is no better than me lying to you. Or, you walking out during the fight is abandonment too. The goal isn't reconciliation, it's neutralization, to ensure no one faces real accountability, especially them. What makes false equivalence framing so dangerous is how quickly it undermines your moral compass. You start believing justice means shared blame. Even when someone clearly overstepped, you soften your voice, downplay your truth, minimize your pain to seem balanced. And in doing so, you let them off the hook. This isn't equality. It's emotional sabotage, wrapped in the language of fairness. They don't want to meet you halfway. They want to drag you into the mud so they don't have to climb out. And if you let them reframe your truth as something just as bad, they win. Not because they're innocent, but because they've convinced you no one is. Artificial authority creation. Artificial authority creation is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone fabricates or inflates their status, expertise, or credibility to gain control, obedience, and admiration without earning it. It's not about being truly qualified. It's about appearing authoritative enough that others stop questioning, start complying, and trust what they wouldn't otherwise give so freely if they knew the truth. This tactic works because people are conditioned to respect authority. From childhood, we're taught to heed teachers, bosses, doctors, leaders. So when someone enters your life with the right tone, title, image, your brain registers them as someone to defer to. And the manipulator knows exactly how to spin that illusion. They might flaunt unverifiable credentials, reference vague experiences, name-drop influential figures, or claim high regard in their field. They could use jargon from psychology, business, religion, or science to sound expert, even if what they say is shallow, misleading, or entirely made up. Their confidence becomes your proof. And once you buy into that authority, the power shifts. You stop challenging their views. You accept their criticism. You doubt your own knowledge even when you're right. This tactic flourishes in toxic relationships, workplace hierarchies, spiritual abuse, and predatory coaching or self-help circles. A manipulator using artificial authority might say, "Trust me, I know people like you. You wouldn't understand. I've studied this for years. I'm only telling you this because no one else will be honest with you." They're not giving facts. They're giving a throne, and you sit on it before realizing it's made of air. The danger of this tactic is how swiftly it erodes your confidence. You stop trusting yourself. You yield, submit, obey, and even when your instincts scream something's wrong, you suppress them. Because surely someone with that authority can't be manipulative, right? But real power doesn't need persuasion. It doesn't need costumes or performances. Only artificial power does, because its strength comes not from truth. It comes from illusion. And it only works if you believe the crown is real. Weaponized empathy. Weaponized empathy is one of the most insidious psychological manipulation tactics because it turns your greatest strength, your capacity to care, feel, understand, against you. It's a calculated exploitation of your compassion to justify destructive behavior, avoid consequences, or keep you emotionally trapped. It doesn't break your heart at once. It uses your heart to dismantle your boundaries step by step. The manipulator doesn't shout or demand. They suffer. They cry. They withdraw. They recount their trauma, their pain, their tragic history. In moments when they should be apologizing, when you tell them how they've hurt you, they flip the script. "You have no idea what I've endured. I'm doing my best. I wish you understood how hard this is for me." And suddenly you're the one comforting them. The pain they've caused you takes a back seat, because now you feel ashamed for making them feel bad. This tactic is especially effective because it taps your humanity. You don't want to be cruel, you want to understand. So you give them the benefit of the doubt. You excuse their aggression, neglect, betrayal, convincing yourself they didn't mean it. They're hurting. They're trying. And gradually, you stop expecting accountability. You start sacrificing for someone who never intended to change. Weaponized empathy isn't just emotional manipulation. It's emotional inversion. You, the one being hurt, become the caregiver, the fixer, the protector of someone who keeps dropping emotional bombs and blaming you for the explosions. It makes you feel that leaving isn't just painful. It's heartless. That setting boundaries is cold. That asking for respect is selfish. And the more you give, the more they take, because they know you can't bear the thought of cruelty. They don't need to overpower you. They just need to awaken your compassion. And you'll silence yourself, justify, forgive for them. This tactic doesn't just trap you in toxic bonds. It traps you in a war with your own empathy. You start wondering if being good means always forgiving, even if it destroys you. And that's how they maintain control, not through violence, but through your own kindness, turned inward against you.